Good morning. I am Ward 1 Councilmember Brianna Nadeau, Chair of the Committee on Public Works and Operations. Today is Friday, February 16th, 2024, and I'm calling to order this hybrid meeting of the committee in room 123 and on the Zoom platform. The time is 9:43 a.m. The hearing is being live streamed at brianneknadeau.com/live as well as on DC Channel 13 and dccouncil.gov. Today's hearing is our regular performance oversight hearing for the Department of For-Hire Vehicles. The committee will also be considering three pieces of legislation related to the department. The first bill under consideration today is Bill 25-416, the Department of For-Hire Vehicles Delivery Vehicle Traffic Enforcement Expansion Amendment Act of 2023. Bill 25-416 was introduced by Councilmember Allen and myself on July 7th, 2024. It would provide Department of For-Hire Vehicles and its vehicle inspection officers, or VIOs in particular, with the statutory authority to issue citations to drivers making food, beverage, or parcel deliveries in the same way VIOs are already enforce traffic safety laws for all other for-hire vehicle operators. In the last council period, we passed emergency and temporary legislation to grant this enforcement authority, noting the frequent concerns and safety risks posed by the significant increases in deliveries. This has resulted in an increase in double parking, blocking of crosswalks and bike lanes, and other violations in need of attention. Bill 25-416 would make this temporary authority permanent, which makes it important that we understand how this enforcement has been going thus far. I'm glad that DFHV's program manager, Travis Nembhard, will be joining as a government witness today so we can have a direct conversation about his team's work. I also appreciate the participation of food and parcel delivery workers and platforms in today's hearing. Since this bill would also make permanent the definition for carriers for hire as a distinct category of for-hire vehicles, I want to make sure this industry is invited to more regularly participate in these hearings moving forward. The second bill under consideration today is Bill 25-548, the Leveraging Engagement in Transit Services for Greater Outcomes, or Let's Go Amendment Act of 2023. Let's Go was introduced by Councilmember Henderson and co-introduced by Councilmembers Allen, Lewis George, Robert White, Gray, and Pinto. The bill would require Department of For-Hire Vehicles to prepare and publish an annual ridership report for its microtransit programs, including School Connect, DC Neighborhood Connect, Transport DC, Vets Ride, and the Non-Emergency Medical Transportation Program. This bill is quite literally about ongoing performance oversight. As our performance and budget hearings for the Department of For-Hire Vehicles revealed last year, the microtransit programs operated by the Department of For-Hire Vehicles all serve laudable goals, but do not have the appropriate transparency and program analysis to ensure they are meeting those goals. Finally, we'll consider Bill 25-620, the For-Hire Vehicle Trade Stress Requirement Enhancement Act of 2023. Bill 25-620 was introduced by Councilmember Bonds and co-introduced by Councilmembers Lewis, George, Pinto, and Gray. This legislation would expand statutory requirements for trade dress markings rideshare vehicles. Trade dress functionally means a logo or company identification. It's currently already required for vehicles that are not taxi cabs, but this bill is an opportunity to revisit whether those requirements are still sufficient. Clear and conspicuous trade dress is important for consumer safety to make sure riders aren't getting in the wrong vehicle. It also clearly identifies vehicles that fall under the enforcement jurisdiction of VIOs. My plan for today, after we hear from public witnesses, is to start with standard performance oversight questions before moving on to questions about each bill. Because this legislation is so closely related to performance oversight topics, I'll save some oversight questions to ask during consideration of the relevant legislation. To summarize, here are my top priorities for today's hearing. First, I'd like to learn about the Department of For-Hire Vehicles' progress and plans for FY24 to tackle the continued issue of the access to wheelchair accessible vehicles, or WAVEs. The committee allocated a new recurring fund of $500,000 to support incentives and programs expanding WAVE access, but gave the agency considerable freedom to experiment with what really works. Second, I'd like to understand the agency's plan for establishing a universal e-hailing platform for DC taxicabs, especially in light of continued competition from ride-hailing companies. Third, I want to establish a baseline understanding of carriers for hire and where the oversight of that industry falls within DC government, now that food and parcel delivery has passed its initial phase as an emergent industry. Fourth and finally, I want to use this hearing to chart a path for the district's constellation of microtransit programs, in particular how these programs interact with and ideally support public transit. This is an overdue conversation. Some logistical announcements. In addition to being in person and on Zoom, the hearing is being live broadcast at brianneknadeau.com/live as well as Channel 13 and the council website. Witnesses testifying on behalf of an organization will have 5 minutes to provide oral testimony, and all others will have 3 minutes. In order to ensure we hear from all members of the public, I ask that all witnesses stick to their allotted time. All witnesses participating in this hearing via Zoom are listed as attendees. When I call your name, you'll be invited to join the panel and accept that invite, turn on your camera, and when it's your turn, you can unmute to testify. For those who are in person, when I call your name, please make your way to the witness table. If you're having trouble gaining access to the Zoom and you've pre-registered, you can reach my team at publicworks@dccouncil.gov and we will try to resolve your issue. Okay, our first panel includes Stephanie Griffith Richardson, parent leader at PAVE, Taisha Andrews, parent leader at PAVE, Maya Martin Cadigan, executive director of PAVE, Elizabeth Reddick, parent leader at PAVE, and Carla Ritweed, parent leader at PAVE.
Good morning.
Good morning. And before you begin, I'm going to ask, since you're all representing the same organization, typically what we do is one person gets 5 minutes and everybody else gets 3. So I don't know if you've already decided who wants to do what or how much time you want to take. I will allow you guys to figure that amongst yourselves, but if you need a second to figure that out, feel free.
I deferred the 5 minutes to the executive director of PAVE, to Maya, and I can go directly after her.
Oh, very good. Okay, so we'll start with Maya Martin Cadigan then.
Maya, are you on? Maya, I'm deferring to you to
Oh,
go
thank you,
first.
Stephanie. Apologies. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone, and I hope everyone is having a beautiful Friday. Apologies. I am, as all parents know today, schools are closed, and so I am juggling all of those beautiful things. But I will do the org testimony, and then our parent leaders will do their testimony. But I can go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, Chairperson Nadeau, committee members and staff. My name is Maya Martin Cadigan, and I am the founder and executive director of PAVE, which stands for Parents Amplifying Voices in Education. I'm also a Ward 4 resident, the founder and executive director of PAVE, and a parent of a 14-month-old boy, 7th generation Washingtonian. Today, I'm testifying on the performance of the Department for Hire Vehicles as it relates to safe passage for students. For background, PAVE parent leaders that you're going to hear from today are mothers, fathers, grandmothers, and other caregivers who share their stories, dig deeply into understanding education policy, and bring their voices to our city's leaders in order to impact the educational experience of all children in DC. Our parent leaders are overwhelmingly Black, many are Native Washingtonians, and the majority live in neighborhoods that wrestle with community violence, food and housing insecurity, and a lack of excellent school options. Every year, PAVE parent leaders come together at their annual Parent Policy Summit to choose which issues to prioritize for next year. After 6 years of focusing on school-based mental health and out-of-school time programs, PAVE parent leaders have chosen one of their campaigns on safe passage, given the volume and severity of incidents youth witness or experience as they get to and from school. And their work to develop their safe passage policy solutions that I'm going to talk about today and that our parent leaders are going to share, they formed coalitions with school leaders, policy experts, community organizations, and students to ensure that their statement truly reflects the needs and vision of communities across DC. The Department for Hire Vehicles plays a key role in making sure students are safe as they travel to school through their DC School Connect program. We really appreciate the department's staff as they've engaged with us as we sought to learn more about what's going on the ground to get to the best solution for students. We know that many students rely on public transportation, including transit from the DC School Connect program. They use a variety of methods in our back to school survey in fall 2021. Parents who are mostly Black and most of whom lived in 7 and 8, we found that students were most frequently driven to school, though other transportation methods did differ based on family income. Lower income families were far more likely to utilize public transportation options to get their students to school. And we heard from all parents, even those with low incomes, that they chose to drive their children to school to ensure their safety. Commute distance also varied based on ward of residence. Students living in 7 and 8 have a much longer distance to get to school, except in the students in those wards travel on average 3 miles compared to less than 2 miles for any other ward except for Ward 5. So DC School Connect is vital to getting their students to school on time for parents in these wards. However, we've also heard that for DC School Connect, parents have had great experiences, but it's not available to everyone. We've heard from school leaders that they really love the program and they appreciate that it's just their students who are riding that bus to ensure their safety and so that students and families know each other. We were especially impressed to hear from the Department of that there have been no safety incidents on any of the routes since their program began, which they attribute to the bus attendant positioned on each bus. But the hard part is that not all parents have been able to access this program due to limited routes, large wait lists, and a first come, first served sign up process. So there are a few solutions that we have come up with at PAVE and with our parent leaders to help improve DC School Connect. First, we would love for the department to increase the routes to transport more students across wards, prioritizing students and school communities with the greatest need. We understand the challenge of that given the cost of the program, but we've even seen in Ward 4 that the bus is currently serving some students in neighborhood schools because of the distance that those students need to travel, because sometimes kids are traveling across really unsafe roads. And around the city, the distance students are traveling may not be long, but also may not be metro accessible. So DC School Connect really should seek to fill that gap for students. The second is around the first come, first serve process. Often means that students who have outsized needs aren't able to get access to the program. So we want to identify ways to create a more equity-centered enrollment process. And while the other piece is that while 7 and 8 have most of the operation with a small pilot program in 4, we know that students in those wards even don't always attend their neighborhood school. So we want to think about ways that students can go to get transported to out of boundary, schools that are out of boundary, out of their ward as well. So expanding those routes and then making sure to analyze the routes that WMATA provides to provide new routes that WMATA is not servicing currently. And then lastly, regularly aggregating data and releasing that on this effectiveness and usage of the program. I think especially given our conversation with the department, it would be important to highlight about the safety incidents, total usage, cost per student, usage per school, and capacity. So those are some of the pieces that we are talking about here today and our parent leaders are going to expand upon in their stories, but I appreciate the time of the committee.
Thank you so much. We'll now go to Stephanie Richardson.
Thank you again, and good morning to all, to the chair and committee. I appreciate the time and the attention that you're going to give us this morning. My name is Stephanie Griffith Richardson, and my son Langston attends L.C. Whitlow Stokes East End. Stokes is one of the few language immersion and specialty schools east of the river in Ward 7. I also serve on PAVE, the Parent Amplifying Voices in Education's PLE Ward 7 board. I'm here today as a concerned Ward 7 parent and active community member in hopes that you will continue to protect students in safe passage while traversing to and from school. This school year, my son is a rider on the DC Connect to Stokes in Ward 7 campus. As a single parent, transportation is my sole responsibility. So I value the coveted seat to lessen my burden, whereas many other parents that I know at Stokes are not as fortunate. In my role as classroom parent, I have networked with other parents and found an overwhelming number to be on a long, never moving wait list. With such a long wait list, I was shocked that on my son's route, only 6 of 15 seats are utilized. Countless parents at Stokes shared stories of applying early and getting no notice or being placed on a wait list. Having been on the never moving wait list last school year, I knew their position would not change and could not offer any solace as status inquiries are often unanswered. My second dilemma with ridership is every parent's nightmare, which is putting your child in an unsafe environment. Unlike the suburbs, good neighborhoods are drawn in DC block by block. So while we are safely ensconced on a tree-lined, family-friendly block, 2 blocks away is a crack den with 2 known trap houses coupled with an intersection of Minnesota Avenue Southeast. This busy thoroughfare is a racetrack for motorcyclists, ATVers, um, Marylanders who in rush hour cut through the city. And to my shock and dismay, we would have to cross Minnesota Avenue with no crossing guard and a limited working pedestrian signals to block 4 blocks away in front of a high crime public housing area. I'm struggling to understand how bus stop maps were drawn. I question whether review of crime data was carefully considered when mapping the pickup and drop off routes. According to MPD's 7th District, in the last 6 months, the catchment area experienced significant spikes in criminal activity, including stabbings, shootings, and sexual assaults. I must rely on the relationship that I've built with the driver and assistants to keep informed on the route happenings, as a non-functioning app provides no communication or updates. Nevertheless, while there are significant process improvements critically needed, there's a greater value in expanding DC Connect limited scope. I believe a program like this is vital for students to have reliable and safe transportation to school, and just a few operational fixes can really help ensure this program reaches its vision. If DC Connects can identify realistic solution in partnership with MPD, Deputy Mayor of Education, and Deputy Mayor of Public Safety and Justice, it could expand and improve the functionality. To address some of these issues I've experienced, DC Connect DFHV should consider the following. I ask that you consider redirect funds from the non-working app to hire more dispatch workers and administrative support who can actively manage seat allotment through the school year. Work in conjunction with MPD Safety Office to build safe bus routes. The Department for Hire Vehicles should increase DC Connect routes to transport more students across wards, prioritizing students in school communities where greater need, especially middle school students who have limited options to get to quality schools outside of Ward 7 and 8. Thank you for allowing me to testify and share what I see for our kids and for our district.
Thank you so much. So everybody remaining on the panel is going to have 3 minutes. And we just ask you to watch the clock as you're giving your testimony so we can make sure we respect everyone's time. Thank you so much. And we'll hear next from Taisha Andrews.
Good morning, everyone. My apologies. I had to improvise this morning because I am still at the dentist's office with my youngest son, and this appointment has run well beyond the time. So my apologies in advance.
I hear you, Mama. You're doing great.
Thank you. So hello, Councilmember Nadeau and DC Council staff. My name is Taisha Andrews. I'm a Ward 8 resident, native Washingtonian, and I serve as a paid citywide and Ward 8 PLE board member. I'm also a parent, and my children currently attend Plummer Elementary and McKinley Tech High School. Thank you for being here today and holding this hearing. As a parent and resident of the District of Columbia, I have a lot of experience helping my family navigate the various modes of transportation in the city. First, I have some data that I feel is important for those on this council and the Department for Hire Vehicles to know about the experience of parents getting their kids to and from school. In recent surveys, it was found that children living in wards 5, 7, and 8 are often traveling over 2 miles to get to school, some traveling over 3 miles. Though 50% of all students in DC live in wards 7 and 8, they are the ones traveling further than any other ward besides Ward 5 to get to and from school each day. During their travels, our youth are being targeted and enduring or witnessing violence. This often increases with the distance to school, as many students travel across wards and even across the city to get to and from school. We must do a better job at protecting all of our children because they are our future. As a parent, I have many concerns about my children, school safety. When I heard about the DC School Connect program, I was hopeful that my son would be able to utilize the service. I applied several times for my son to be able to take the DC School Connect bus. I have been denied each time because seats are so limited. I believe this is a huge issue because many students in Ward 7 and 8 are traveling far to attend school, which has allowed more time and space for incidents of violence to occur between I'm sorry, my apologies. I believe this is a huge issue because many students in Ward 7 and 8 are traveling far to attend school, which has allowed more time and space for incidents of violence to occur both to and between students. I hope that if my children were able to ride on the DC School Connect, that they would no longer face any challenges that they had while traveling to school. Last year, my son was on his way home from school at Jefferson, where he attended at the time, and he had an incident happen to him in the way. Keep in mind, this is not the only time that he has had an issue going to and from school. But most recently, in this situation, my son was jumped by other children outside of the Waterfront Metro Station. There was no trained adult around to help him, and the only only people present to intervene were his peers. When I first filed a report to his school, nothing was done, and the children who jumped him were not held accountable. I also contacted MPD to file a police report, and it was not pursued. Our kids need to be safe traveling to and from school, and they need to get to school efficiently. Teenagers now are having a much different experience getting to school than what I received growing up. I didn't witness all of the violence that my children are. The times have changed, and we as city leaders must create systems and put structures in place to help our kids, especially when they're doing something as simple as going to school or coming home. I'm not alone in these concerns. PAVE parent leaders have worked with schools, community organizations, and even agency staff to come up with specific solutions to address this issue. I am asking the Department of For-Hire Vehicles to increase the DC School Connect routes during school arrival and dismissal, prioritizing those neighborhoods and schools with greatest needs. The Department for Hire Vehicles is not alone in this work. For there to be an increase in routes, the Department of Operations and Infrastructure and the DC Human Resources will need to work together to recruit and retain more bus drivers
Thank
for
you,
the
Ms.
DC
Andrews.
School Connect program. I'm sorry, I had two
That's okay.
sentences
I know you
left. My
can't see the
apologies.
clock while you're
No,
doing
I
this.
can't.
So,
Sorry.
but and we'll get into some questions after this to make sure we can hear the rest of everybody's
Thank you.
testimony too. Thank
Again,
you.
my apologies.
No, of course, you're fine. Thank you so much. And now we'll hear from Elizabeth Reddick.
Good morning, Councilmember Nadeau and council staff. My name is Elizabeth Reddick. I'm also a PAVE Ward 7 PLE board member. I'm going to kind of deviate a little bit from my my written testimony for the sake of time, but I'm here also to talk about the DC School Connect program. Now, while the program has expanded slightly from 300 students at 24 schools to 44 schools and 1,700 essentially students, it's still widely inaccessible, like a lot of my peers have expressed, and it's only available in 7 and 8. And some of the concerns about that is you have to go to a Ward 7 school to be transported to a Ward 7 school, Ward 8 school transferred to a Ward 8 school. So again, like the families that are going across the wards aren't, one, being able to have access to the program, and then of course, there's limited seats already. I feel like it needs to be expanded and include more seats for the reasons that I stated, but also because we need to prioritize the students with the highest needs. There's a huge, gun violence issue in the community. And a lot of that stems from the fact that people are having to cross neighborhoods to get to school. So that's how it's spilling into the school. We need to make sure that by expanding the program, that we're creating a safety net for those kids that are, either already identified as high risk when it comes to prevention services. And I feel like it's really an extension of public safety. And then you also have older children that are transferring their younger siblings and cousins to school. So they may be crossing wards. My sibling may go to school right next to my, in my neighborhood, and then I'm having to cross over and to go to Ward 5 to go to school, So I think that we could do more to help those families, because a lot of these are working families, to be able to provide that support. So even something as simple as if you have a large population that say, the kids go to the younger kids go to Plummer, and you have a DC School Connect that goes from Plummer and takes them across the river over to Roosevelt. This is an example. It's not, concrete, because we know we have a large population that have sibling, connections in that way. So I'm just really encouraging us to really rethink how we're using this program. And then the one last thing I want to talk about the Let's Go Act that you guys are going to be speaking about later. If we can include that to not just evaluate how the program is being used, but I know it's already talking about violence and things of that, but we can also look at school attendance, crime usage, diversion for crime, and how far children are traveling, and not so much just strictly focusing on it looks like it's parent heavy. It's looking at whether or not the parents are, using the program and why they're not using the program, but it's not enough accountability on I feel like on the for hire side. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And finally, we'll hear from Carla Reed-Witt.
Hello, Councilmember Nadeau and committee members. My name is Carla Reed-Witt. I'm a PAVE Ward 7 Advisory Board member, and I'm also a Ward 7 Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner. Thank you for having this hearing today and for being willing to hear the experience, solutions, and thoughts of DC residents. I'm here today to talk about DC School Connect, which sits within the Department of For-Hire Vehicles. Here in DC, we have created a school system of choice with DCPS and charter schools, both being options for students to attend. However, when our school system of choice was created, we did not consider what it would mean in practical terms and failed to create the necessary transportation infrastructure to support it. Each year, more and more students travel across neighborhoods and wards. Unfortunately, we neglected to prepare for what that increased travel for education would mean for students, families, and schools. Among the many unforeseen consequences of our ever-increasing DC school choice is an increased risk to student safety with respect to transportation. While walking around my single-member district and speaking with my neighbors, I found that most of their children travel outside of our ward to attend school. One neighbor I spoke with has a child who attends Dill Middle School. She and her husband drive back and forth across the city each school day because they feel it is unsafe to allow their child to take public transportation, and they are not eligible for DC School Connect. My neighbor shared how exhausting the commute is and said, I quote, "The Tinley Metro has a lot of children loitering and snatching stuff, and the walk to Dill is filled with fights and conflicts," unquote. We cannot continue to run our school system the way we used to when the average student lived within walking distance of their school. We must adjust to the change that we created. We have to reimagine what safe passage looks like for students as they travel across wards and the city. Currently, the DC School Connect program only operates in Ward 7 and 8, as you heard, with a pilot program in Ward 4. It supports only a few hundred students out of the thousands in the city who need it, and it doesn't run across wards, which means you must live and go to school in the same ward to be eligible for the service. As part of a multi-pronged effort to create solutions for safe passage, PAVE parents are recommending the expansion of DC School Connect routes for kids traveling across wards, prioritizing students with the highest needs, and for the Department of For-Hire Vehicles to work together with the Department of Operations and Infrastructure and DC Human Resources to recruit and retain more bus drivers. Creating more seats for the program will expand access and allow people like my neighbors to get their kids to school safely and efficiently. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much to this panel. So, what are the issues with the app? Ms. Griffith Richardson referred to it as non-working.
Sure, it's an app that doesn't function. It doesn't track. It's supposed to allow you to see when pickup is or send you notifications if there are changes. Recently, when we had a snow day, I actually got in the car and drove to pick up my son because I couldn't find out if they were picking up or not, and the school wasn't aware. And so in the middle of traveling to pick him up, I kept checking the app, nothing, no updates. They picked up my son, and we were all in panic trying to find the children because nothing works. It also is supposed to give you notifications as far as communications with the driver. None of that works as well. So it just doesn't function whatsoever.
Thank you. Do
Mhm.
you think the Department of For Hire Vehicles, and this is for anyone, and the School Connect program is the right place for the transportation to be housed, especially if it covers the entire district? Why not under OSSI?
I mean, I'm happy to start on that one. I think we have a lot of parents who use the OSSI Department of Transportation for their students who have IEPs that require it. And the feedback we've gotten on that program is not overwhelmingly positive. So I think right now, I think if you talk to paid parent leaders, they would say they want that program to start to function more effectively. I think the difference with DC School Connect is that while there are problems with things like the app, families are not overall disappointed in the program itself, right? There is more satisfaction that we've heard from folks in the program versus the OSSI Department of Transportation buses. We are not hearing it there yet. So I think the challenge that we have is that I think OSSI has some work to do on their side first for a much smaller program before we expand to including this as well, from the feedback that we've heard from many of our families.
Okay.
Elizabeth also has her hand raised.
Yes, I see Ms. Reddick. Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to say I'm not a lawyer, but from a legal standpoint, I think housing it under OSSI would be a lot more difficult to justify why all students don't have access to the program versus obviously OSSI's transportation right now, you have to qualify either under a 504 plan or IEP in order to receive services. So if you move it to OSSI, it would be a lot more difficult to manage as far as the process of deciding who qualifies and who doesn't qualify. So that's what my concern personally is for moving it to OSSI.
Thank you. Ms. Andrews?
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth, for your concern because I never thought about that concern. My only concern with Aussie, because my youngest son uses Aussie, is that they're not very good with communication. There have been plenty of times where they've said that the bus came, but it didn't come. The bus has come late and there was no reason provided. I'm also a parent that's a part of the text pilot program. I received maybe 2 texts since the program started, and they were delayed. They didn't come on time. The text messages, I mean. So, and I haven't received any text messages since. So I only received those 2 text messages when that program started. They're not good with communication. They're not good with following up. They do have a lot of work to do. I appreciate the work that they're doing, but I do think it would be a lot more work if they're trying to incorporate children without special needs, especially to make sure they still have the routes for the children with special needs, and they would have to be separated from the general public students. So that will require a lot of restructuring on their end.
Thank you. Ms. Griffith Richardson?
Thank you. And to Maya's point about process and program improvements, I think that should be our focus as opposed to the move to OSSI, because as my PAVE colleagues have outlined, for various reasons, there are uh, so many things that we can improve within the programmatic for DC Connect, especially as I think about I'm just going to hit back to that point about middle school students, because unfortunately we're east of the river, and like west of the river, 76% of students are going to specialized schools. And so, but east of the river only has 24% of specialized schools, despite having the majority of students in school. So that means that we are moving across the river and to other wards to go to better schools. And so without, having the ability to go outside Ward 7 and 8, and transportation, that's why it's so important to improve right now as we are building, to allow for expansion to go outside and getting them to better schools until we have equity, good school equity in all wards.
Thank you. And just And if you wish, everyone can answer every question, but don't feel like you have to if you don't have something to say. Well, I'll take all of your opinions. Do you support keeping School Connect exclusive to supporting safe passage programs like it is now?
Do you mean if it would, so I think one of the things families have actually asked for is thinking about School Connect around even out of school time programs. So programs after hours where kids need to get to and from schools. One of the ways that we actually talk to school leaders, because part of our coalition is with school leaders to reduce that, or even thinking about the part in my testimony where I said families who are traveling and trying to travel outside of ward, like we talk to DC Department of For-Hire Vehicles and we understand their concern about the cost when they're traveling more than a certain number of miles. But schools had said it would even be helpful and important if they could pick up at metro stations. So for instance, as opposed to taking a kid from Ward 8 to Ward 4, maybe it's that you're picking up at the Ward 4 Tacoma station and now getting them from that station to their school. And that reduces cost and allows you to start to expand programs for the after school hours. And now allows you to offer that program to more students. So we've heard from some schools as well, ways that like they would like to see the program expanded. I think the other piece that Stephanie referred to is like, you know, right now DC School Connect is serving a lot of elementary school students. And we would love to see it serve students in more grades, going all the way up to high school. I know that's another question of expansion and cost. But again, I think the metro idea, especially with the older students, might be a great way to be able to do that, where it's picking up at the metro station and then it's just taking them to and from their school and covering more of and those are the kids that have more out of school time programs, to be honest, doing more of those after school program hours. So those are some of the things that we've heard from both parents, and we've married that from what we've heard from school leaders and when our conversations with the department.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Ms. Reddick, you want to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to add that I feel like it has evolved because when I first heard about School Connect prior to COVID, it was more of like a prevention type of thing for gun violence, from my interpretation. And it was primarily geared towards high school, but the usage wasn't there. And so I feel like we have been evolving and changing the program in order to increase the usage, because most of the families that I knew that were using it were going to like Thurgood Marshall, and they were going to Congress, like they were going to the metro station and taking them from the metro station to the schools. I'm not sure how it is evolved now, because the feedback that I'm hearing now sounds like it's different than that, but that's the way that I had known it to operate prior to COVID and then immediately after. But like I said, the ridership just wasn't there. It may be 5 kids from the entire school, maybe, you know, getting picked up and going to whatever the school was in the neighborhood. And to me, that was the issue. Like, so for example, at Bard, it wouldn't be effective because Bard is directly across the street from Congress Heights. But when Bard was off of Alabama Avenue, they could pick them up at the Minnesota Avenue station and then bring them to Bard so that they could get there safely, because they have to go through the Benton Terrace neighborhood in order to get to school. So I think that perhaps we should do a historical evaluation to see how the program started and the adjustments that have been made, and then kind of tweak from there, as opposed to constantly trying to make all these readjustments without looking at the big picture.
Thank you. In addition to assessing student safety risk, should we be looking to prioritize students with the most significant school commutes?
Yes, I definitely agree with that. Those who live in the higher crime neighborhoods and those who travel the furthest to go to school, I think should be the priority.
Great, thank you. Ms. Griffith Richardson. Okay. Well, thank you so much to this panel. I truly appreciate your testimony today and look forward to incorporating it into the record.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson Nadeau.
Okay, so our next panel, I believe we're going to have Kelly Whittier in lieu of Rachel Clark. And Kai Hall, coordinator of the DC Transportation Equity Network, Michael Havlin, and in person, Heidi Case, co-founder of the DMV Disability and Senior Community, Chad Horrell, head of Regional Government Affairs, Mid-Atlantic and South, from DoorDash. And then back in the Zoom, Alex Baca, DC Policy Director for Greater Washington. So please come forward if you're testifying on this panel. Okay, and we'll begin with Kelly Whittier in the Zoom. Uh-oh, Kelly, you're unmuted, but for some reason we can't hear you. You want to try switching to phone audio? Oh, is that?
How about now?
There you go. Now I can hear you.
It's Friday.
There you go. Yep.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm here on behalf of my colleague, Rachel Clark, who could not be here today. I will read her testimony. Good morning, Chairperson Nadeau and members and staff of the committee. I'm Rachel Clark, Policy Director at the Redstone Center at the GW School of Public Health. The Redstone Center works to advance evidence-based policy solutions to address the interconnected public health threats of chronic disease and climate change. My comments today reflect the center's analysis and are not the views of the university. I'm here today to testify in support of the Leveraging Engagement in Transit Services for Greater Outcomes, the Let's Go Amendment Act of 2023, as a strategy to assess and improve the district's transportation services. Access to transportation is a public health issue. In its 2018 Health Equity Report, DC Health identified access to transportation as a key driver of health outcomes due to its essential link to employment, physical activity, and access to vital services. In the district, our unequal transportation system, which particularly underserves residents in 5, 7, and 8, exacerbates underlying geographic disparities in access to key amenities. For example, district residents in wards with fewer supermarkets also have fewer public transportation options, as well as the lowest car ownership rates in the city. Many residents in low food access areas rely on public transportation to buy food. Physically bringing food home can be challenging for those that use public transit, particularly those with mobility challenges, and limiting finances can make it hard to afford that transportation. The microtransit programs addressed by this legislation represent the district's attempts to fill in these key transportation gaps and help vulnerable residents access basic needs. While we support the goals of these programs, the district does not currently have a comprehensive, data-driven strategy to guide their operation and development. We support the legislation today because it will provide the council with a better understanding of ridership, program operations, and user needs, and how those programs should be improved to meet those basic needs. My knowledge of this issue is based on past work to address senior hunger in the district. At 14.3% in 2022, the district had the highest rate of senior food insecurity in the nation. To address this startling statistic, Councilmember Mary Che convened a working group attended by representatives from council offices, district agencies providing senior services, and many community-based organizations serving district seniors. One of the working group's major areas of focus was transportation and accessibility. Because transportation poses an issue for many seniors in accessing food and other services, food access points are not always located by public transportation routes, and public transit can be difficult to navigate. Seniors in wards 5, 7, and 8 have lower metro access, fewer grocery stores, and fewer farmers markets than any other ward. For this reason, it makes a lot of sense for the district to explore ways to provide supplemental transportation access for seniors and to also for residents with low income, disabilities, or other barriers to public transportation options. On top of metro access and reduced price metro, the programs operated by the Department of For-Hire Vehicles, as well as several programs operated by the Department of Aging and Community Living, aim to fill this gap. However, the working group found that there's little to no coordination, information collection, or strategic planning the Department of For-Hire Vehicles and DACL's micro transit programs. The agencies do not know who is using which programs, if these groups overlap, and who is being missed and why. In addition, despite this plethora of services, awareness of these programs is low. Program operators do not perform coordinated or targeted outreach to identify residents in need of these services or to make sure that they receive the necessary information. A top need identified by a 2016 needs assessment prepared for the then Department on Aging was knowing what services are available. When asked by the working group about outreach, many organizations and agencies stated that they do very little outreach, that most programs are shared by word of mouth, and that people, quote, just know about them. Some program operators even admitted that they limit their outreach because they don't want demand to exceed current funding levels. As a result, programs tend to reach a certain population, one more familiar with government programming, while hard-to-reach seniors are missed entirely. This is particularly problematic given the elevated rates of social isolation among seniors. In addition, even when outreach is performed, it is done on a program-specific basis with virtually no coordination between implementing organizations and services. This misses opportunities to cross-promote programs and serve similar populations, as well as implement potential efficiencies. The legislation under consideration today would address many of these problems by giving us a better understanding of where and how these programs are being used, who is using them, how services are being communicated to the public, and the quality of services being provided. This will help the Department for Hire Vehicles and Council understand whether these programs are working as intended, as well as identify areas of improvement. To strengthen the legislation even further, we recommend adding 2 additional programs operated by DACL, Senior Med Express and Connector Card, which are providing additional similar services and should be incorporated into our comprehensive analysis. The Redstone Center also recommends adding reporting requirements to the legislation aimed at gaining an understanding of why services are being used, whether there are redundancies, and what gaps remain. For example, the legislation should also require the agency to collect information from participants about why they're using a particular program, what needs are being met or not being met, and how they found out about the program. It should also collect information about client experience with the application process to identify processes that could be improved, streamlined, or integrated. The legislation should also require the agency to make recommendations for where services should be created, expanded, or consolidated. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so much for testifying on behalf of Ms. Clark. We truly appreciate it. We'll now hear from Kai Hall, coordinator with DC Transportation Equity Network.
Good morning, Chairperson Nadeau and members of the committee. My name is Kai Hall, and I'm the coordinator of the DC Transportation Equity Network, also called the 10. The 10 is a cross-sector coalition of nonprofits, including direct service and advocacy organizations, committed to seeing a complete transportation system that ensures vulnerable residents are accounted for in the district. You can find a full list of our membership in the written testimony I submitted. Some of our coalition member organizations serve clients who rely on mobility devices to get around. Depending on where their clients live, ride-hailing services and taxis are sometimes the preferred or in some cases the only way to get to and from their appointments. The lack of wheelchair-accessible vehicles in both the ride-hailing and taxi cab fleet poses a major barrier to mobility for the clients served by some of our coalition's member organizations, and no doubt poses the same challenges for thousands more Washingtonians who rely on ride-hailing services and taxi cabs as an option for door-to-door transportation. While our understanding is that the Taxi Cab Service Improvement Amendment Act of 2012 set specific benchmarks for the percentage of wheelchair-accessible vehicles in taxi cab company fleets, in practice, there are still many challenges in reliably being able to access taxis for people who use wheelchairs. We would like to know what progress is being made in addressing this issue and what barriers exist to meeting the requirements set by the 2012 law. With that said, we would like the committee to ask DFHV leaders the following questions. What are the barriers inhibiting taxi cab companies from reaching the 20% benchmark of waves in their fleets set by the law, given only 1 out of the 12 companies listed in the pre-hearing questions met the legal requirement? How might the $500,000 wave incentive best be used to quickly deliver results to provide people who rely on wheelchairs reliable access to waves? Does DFHV have a sense of the cost incurred by people who rely on wheelchairs when they're not able to access wheelchair-accessible taxi cabs? By cost, this may include the price of ride-hailing services, the cost of missing medical appointments because of no-shows, due to lack of waves and the cost of lack of access to jobs due to limited mobility options. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from Michael Havlin.
Hello, Chairperson Nadeau and the committee. Thank you for allowing me some time to testify today. I will try to stay to 3 minutes this time. My name is Michael Havlin. I live east of the river in Ward 7, where, as you have heard from others today, has challenging transportation situation. Today, I'm testifying about ride-sharing apps and services and DFHV's role in monitoring them. I've lived in Ward 7 for about 7 years, and in those 7 years, I have had to take Uber a fair number of times due to the poor public transportation options here. I work and recreate on H Street a lot, and there is no direct transit route to H Street. The streetcar could fix that, but the council keeps defunding it. So often I have to Uber. Over my years of Ubering, I have noticed that Uber rides to and from east of the river tend to be more expensive than other parts of the city, tend to be canceled more often than other parts of the city, and usually take longer to get confirmed than other parts of the city. And this is after controlling for other factors, like distance, for example. If I were ordering an Uber for 4 miles from H Street into Upper Northwest, it would almost certainly be cheaper and better quality than 4 miles from H Street to my home and east of the river. And many of my neighbors have observed the same. Just the other day, for example, I was leaving an institution on H Street with a group of people. Someone who lived equidistant in Brooklyn ordered an Uber at the same time and got their ride confirmed instantly, while I waited about 20 minutes for mine east of the river. Now, these are just anecdotes. I don't have the data to prove that this happens systematically, but DFHV does have the data. DFHV came to a DC 10 meeting a couple of years ago, and they described the data they have. It sounds like they have a universe of transaction and trip level data from all the rideshare companies. I have a significant amount of professional experience working with pricing data just like that, and I can say with a great deal of confidence that the data could conclusively answer these questions. So I think DFHV should run statistical models to answer whether east of the river residents are A, systematically charged higher rates when controlling for other factors, B, have rides canceled on them at systematically higher rates, C, if pickup times are systematically higher than other parts of the city. If DFHV does not have the resources to do this themselves, they could hand the data over to the lab at DC, who absolutely has the expertise to do so. DFHV may protest on confidentiality grounds, but confidentiality clauses do not prevent disclosure of summary statistics and statistical model results. If it turns out that any of these hypotheses are true, DC could choose to sue the rideshare companies, could choose to increase the backhaul subsidy, or could choose to radically increase public transit east of the river. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We'll now hear from Heidi Case, co-founder of the DMV Disability and Senior Community.
Hello, it's great to see you actually in person, Councilmember Nadeau, and I was excited to meet David finally in person, also put a face to the name. I am Heidi Case. I have been a part of the DFHV Accessibility Advisory Committee, actually people with disabilities organized back in 2014 in a committee before even legislation was passed to create that committee, and I was the chair for many years, stepped down just last year for some health reasons. And your priorities and understanding some of these other legislation better from your beginning statement was helpful. So much, I am always a community organizer. Shout out to all the people who have testified before. PAVE should join us at an accessibility advisory committee so that we can co-organize, because DFHE is, I think, one of the most poorly run government agencies in DC. I know that you all refuse to approve the new director. And I get why. and I can assume for good reasons. However, it continues since David Doe left. One example, 2-year questions, shout this out. You, after our testimony last year, got $500,000 from the council for wheelchair accessible vehicles, and they've done nothing. In a meeting at the beginning of February for Transport DC, Kirk Dobson, I forget his exact title, you may know, and people working on it said they hadn't really made a plan yet, and they hope maybe by the end of May, they might have a plan to begin to roll out. How many months? How much time? I know you've heard me before, but just putting it on the record. And it's a significant issue. One of the things I want to bring, and I think council members and this committee needs to understand, Metro's now proposed budget rolled out, by the board a week ago Thursday. One of their major cuts in funding towards Metro access, it is their plan as many as possible, except wheelchairs, get off Metro. It's funded under their program, but they're going to utilize taxis and ride shares. They're already doing it for a lot of trips. It is their intention to greatly, read it yourself, that is coming. All the issues that people are bringing are going to be further impacted by that. As far as some of the legislation, these DoorDash, Uber, the food delivery packages, services, block in their scooters. If you go in front of 14th and Irving where Target is, lots of us go there because you can get a lot of shopping done. There's now actually a grocery, and we can't get dropped off. Between the bike lanes, the wheelchair taxis, Metro access have no access to the curb. You will see I wish I'd gotten pictures. I can do it and send them to you. 15 to 20 scooters sitting right outside the bike lane, just sitting there waiting to go somewhere to pick up and deliver food. I get that it's money, I get that it's income, but if any of those companies ever want us to support them, they need to allow their workers to unionize. Then the community and other stakeholders might be willing to support and find solutions to you. They are companies that take advantage of people of color for the profits of white people. My 2 cents.
Thank you, Ms. Case.
Okay.
We're at time, but we'll do some questions. Okay, very good. And Mr. Horrell.
Chad Horrell, and I'm actually 2022 DoorDash. Sorry. Thank you, Councilmember Nadeau. My name is Chad Horrell, and I'm with DoorDash. In 2022 alone, DoorDash generated over $230 million in economic activity here in the District of Columbia. That included over $155 million for restaurants and over $55 million for Dashers in the district alone. In the district, we have over 54,000 Dashers that make deliveries on our platform. In fact, we have one here today that I believe was hoping to actually testify as well, if he can. Who are these Dashers? They're caregivers, they're teachers, they're veterans. 60% of them are women. The average Dasher works less than 3 hours per week earning on the platform. 94% of them say that what draws them to this type of work is the flexibility that it provides them. They don't want an 8 to 5 job, right? They don't want a 9 to 6, whatever that might be. But they want to be able to earn on the platform, when the time is right for them. Because of the negative impact that expanded ticketing by the Department of For-Hire Vehicles would have on Dashers, we oppose the bill. The reality is delivery workers do not want to park illegally. But due to the lack of curb space in areas of the district, Dashers are given no choice but to, in some cases, circle the block looking for a parking spot, which also creates more traffic congestion, or double parking for a limited period of time to pick up or drop off that order. In 2020, the District Department of Transportation issued a study on curb space, and coming from that study, actually piloted a program moving some of the meters out and actually creating pickup and drop-off zones. In fact, DDOT found these zones were most used by app-based delivery drivers, not the parcel delivery drivers, not rideshare. It was mostly the app-based delivery drivers that were using that space. Dashers do not want to create traffic problems, but and are eager for the district to develop more reasonable solutions to these challenges. In fact, I mean, just think about it. I mean, working, less than 3 hours a week, $100 parking ticket almost wipes out their entire earnings for that week. So that's a pretty drastic proposition for them. Instead of expanding the Department for For-Hire Vehicles ticketing of delivery drivers, we would encourage the council to work with DDOT to help increase the number of pickup and drop-off locations as opposed to this bill. DoorDash also wants to encourage the council not to expand the For-Hire Vehicle trade dress requirement to include delivery drivers. The increase in crime in the district has had an impact on Dashers, undoubtedly. While incidents have been minimal, we are constantly working to provide Dashers with the tips and tools that they need to remain safe. Delivery drivers are very different than rideshare. In some ways, they could be greater targets for theft or carjackings. Why? Because they are getting in and out of their vehicles far more than an Uber driver, a Lyft driver, but they also are oftentimes alone. They don't have a passenger in the car. Oftentimes it's a burger or a burrito. In fact, a recent Washington Post story titled "As Carjackings Rise," in fact, I've got it here, as carjackings rise, food delivery drivers navigate harrowing risks. This article quotes a DC Dasher who said he takes extra precautions, including not carrying a bright red DoorDash food bag because it makes you a target. Such a precaution would no longer be viable for this Dasher if the Dasher must have a lighted sign in their vehicle, similar to a food bag. DoorDash is always willing to work with the council, similarly to the Dash Cam giveaway program that we recently partnered with the city on, as well as our increased partnership with MPD. For today, we oppose the increased ticketing because it would hurt Dashers' ability to earn the extra income they desire on our platform, and the signage could make them criminal targets if expanded to delivery drivers. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much. We'll now hear from Alex Baca.
Good morning. My name is Alex Baca, and I am testifying on behalf of Greater Washington, where I serve as DC Policy Director. We're pleased that in the past year, the committee has devoted considerable energy to DFHV. The agency does need a director, and we would like that director to be someone who has a vision for how the agency can be integrated into the district's transportation planning and operations, and who has experience with and interest in regulating private companies. As in the past, we request that the district expand its regulatory authority to encompass transportation network companies and food delivery services. TNCs and food delivery companies are not as regulated as taxis and limousines, which is inequitable and unsafe. Regulating TNCs should be considered a consumer protection. Understandably, this would require more resources, some of which could perhaps be shifted over from the Neighborhood Connect microtransit program, which too greatly duplicates existing transit routes to be meaningful. Additionally, we'd welcome more detail on School Connect, which commands a considerable amount of DFHV's attention. I'd like to understand more about whether and how it is making kids safer, and by which metrics the agency or the Safe Passage program determines if School Connect is achieving its goals. Lastly, we were very excited by the surcharge on TNC trips into downtown DC that the committee proposed in the FY24 budget. While a 25-cent flat fee on all TNC trips throughout the district was a financially equivalent compromise, it's not a demand-based policy. Given the need to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips in the district, we hope that the committee and the agency prioritize policymaking that regulates taxis and TNC trips based on demand going forward. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Start with Mr. Hall. Do you know if there are any people with disabilities that may not require a waive but are not being well served by for-hire vehicles? And Ms. Case will come to you on that too.
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of my answers and my testimony is based on what I've heard from the members of my coalition. Um, I haven't heard explicitly that people with disabilities who don't use wheelchairs or don't require waves, I'm not sure if they're being well served or not, based on what the members have communicated to me.
Ms. Case?
We have been talking about that Transport DC service has gotten such, the DC chapter of the National Federation of the Blind here has complained, and finally in our last meeting, taxi providers agree Transport DC isn't able to provide service after 4 p.m. You even heard that in Judy Human last year. Another good friend, 7 o'clock, she had to go to the hospital. She's blind, no wheelchair, emergency room. So you get metro access because you're not planning ahead for that. And she had to stay an extra 2.5 hours there before they could ever come up with a cab, non-wheelchair, to service her. So time, if the trips are focused on medical and grocery, that's during the day, they may not see it. For younger people with disabilities who want to live a life, go places, they are definitely seeing that under Transport DC specifically.
And can you help me understand too, what special need a person who is blind has for the vehicle? How does that work?
Okay, so for example, they need assistance finding it.
Sure.
So it's out there. In the past, we've had to get them to train them. They just sit in their cars. She doesn't know you're there and they leave. So they have to be willing to get out of the car and assist them to get to where the vehicle is, open the door. Sometimes people with vision difficulties have other disabilities too. But there's that, and they have to be really good at telling them where we're dropping you off. Okay, the address is directly ahead. Some of that kind of communication that they wouldn't have otherwise.
That makes sense. How was your trip to the Wilson building today?
Okay, a week ago, I was an hour late for Department of Healthcare Finance because it took them over an hour. They allowed me to testify, of course, Chairman Henderson. So I was here actually an hour early this morning. I was the only one in the room because I wanted to make sure that didn't happen. So I think in the daytime, it's a little better, but a lot of the wheelchairs are prioritized for Transport DC. Anyways, so which is Metro Access alternative. In case people don't know, you have to have Metro Access to get that cab service alternative.
Very good. Thank you. I definitely recognize there's not enough curb access for Metro Access and waves, and that's a problem I want to address. So I definitely want to work with you on that. Can you talk about your experiences during meetings of the Accessibility Advisory Council?
An example, as you know, I stepped down from chair for some health reasons. I am better. But for example, a staff person left who was running it, and DFHB simply had no meetings for Transport DC for 3 months and no notification. Christian Blake, the Metro ADA program and planning person who I work with closely, had to text me and say, what's happening? Why aren't we having meetings? That's an example of somebody else's. They gotta have somebody to step in, even letting us know, okay, I don't know all the answers to things, but let's have a meeting. I can find out. That's definitely an example.
Do you think DFHB is acting on the AAC's recommendations?
No. because I have not been involved as much in the last 6 to 9 months,
Yeah.
I wish I could give you a specific answer, but I could check on it and try to get back to you. But the wheelchair accessible money is a definite priority of them, and that would be a clear example. I don't understand that. They say there's no money. Now you gave the money.
What do you want to see the agency do with the WAVE funding that would be most effective?
I've thought a lot about that. What I think they need to do is incentivize more drivers to move out of standard cabs into waves by trip funding, guaranteeing them. Okay, we've got, and that's the one place, DFH, we force them, we get monthly. Every wave trip, how many vehicles in total, how many waves, all of that, we see that number, you know, we make them show us year over year. It drops every month. There was from December to January, there was like 4 more waves gone from the total number providing trips. The trip numbers are falling. So they can do numbers. And I get that it's hard to get them to provide that information.
You were talking earlier about the delivery mopeds blocking the curb in Columbia Heights. So we have new traffic control officers there that I've put in place. One of the things that we are having them do though is, so the mopeds are in an area that keeps them out of the traffic way and out of the bike lane. And we think is better than having cars parked there, which was what would
I would
be.
agree.
Yeah.
Totally. What we've said to DDOT for a long time is they need to increase PUDOs.
Yeah.
I know this is a big DDOT issue, but pickup and drop-offs, and they need to prioritize accessibility and moving people in and out.
That makes sense. And what do they say when you ask for that?
The dumbest one last year was because they need curb cuts there. Even though they're in the middle of the street, if you're dropping off there, there's got to be a curb cuts. They say that's historical curb and they can't put curb cuts. They want, and it impacts the bike lane people.
Mhm.
And that's challenging. And it's also the law and it's also safety.
Yeah. It's a challenge in that particular location, but I get that it's a bigger issue around the city.
Places
Yeah,
too.
exactly. Yeah.
Seniors, definitely, and people with disabilities for safety reasons want and need to be dropped off at the curb.
Yep. Mm-hmm. What do you think the mayor should be looking for in a new director?
Good question. Someone who's willing and looking across the country, willing to do out of the box thinking, someone who's good at gathering all the stakeholders together, figuring things out. I get lots of people want DoorDash. As a person with a disability, when I didn't have kitchen access, my kitchen wasn't, there was a year I was using it sometimes a couple times a day. So I'm not saying it's all bad, but we've got to find, that's why I thought PUDOs, at least creating on each block a place where that can happen. And drivers and people traveling with them can feel secure that that's going to happen. At one point, I was getting dropped off there, and because they didn't want to let people off into the bike lane, DFHV was telling them to let me out on the other side into traffic. I had a driver, I'm like, nope.
Yeah.
But, you know, so it's challenging.
Right. It's challenging. And I think that,
Communication, I really think one of the major problems, and you've heard it throughout and on the apps, communication is extremely poor.
Yeah.
Someone with skills and priorities of that, getting community feedback and input without having to fight would be awesome.
thank you.
Thank you.
Michael Hadlin, to clarify your testimony, are you saying that Department of For Hire Vehicles does have the data to enforce disparate treatment for riders east of the river, but not acting on it?
I believe so. Someone came to a DC 10 meeting a couple of years ago and described the data that they have. And it sounded like to me that they had transaction and trip level data, but we're not doing anything with it.
Okay.
Councilmember Nadeau?
Yes, of course, Ms. Case.
Just to tell him, my response to that is before Uber agreed to get licenses here, this council, all respect to you, agreed not to use any of that data, or they said, we won't serve DC. That was
Right.
an agreement the council made years ago, and DFHV unfortunately is stuck with that. That's my understanding with some history.
Understood. Mr. Hadlin, it's my understanding that DFHV cannot see costs for rides by distance for TNCs. Currently, they have to rely on cost estimators on the company's websites like the rest of us. Do you think that's a problem for oversight?
If that's the case, then yeah, definitely. We should get transaction level data, true transaction level data. Yeah, and we should be able to utilize it to its full potential.
Thank you. Mr. Harrell, thank you for your testimony as well. I was a little concerned by your testimony that said one parking ticket wipes out most of a driver's weekly earnings. Doesn't give a good outlook on their earnings.
Well, if they work less than 3 hours a week, you're making over $24 per active hour on the platform.
Okay.
That comes out less than $100.
Um,
And the 3 hours a week, that's the average across the board.
got it. Of course, any ticket they'd be receiving from the Department of For Hire Vehicles, they could also get from DPW or MPD, right? Because there's only about 24 VIOs, so it's not necessarily specific to. I mean, wouldn't it be unfair if delivery drivers weren't subject to the same enforcement standards as ride-hailing drivers, especially since many drivers do both?
I mean, I think it's with expanding the oversight here, it's almost like we're targeting them. That's, I think, the larger concern. Yes, they are subject to ticketing just like anybody else, but I feel like, we're now providing another organization to actually go out there and find them and ticket them. And that's what we're concerned about.
I think it's the opposite. I think they've had a carve out all this time, and now we're making them the same as everybody else.
Okay, well, I'm not sure we see it that way.
Okay. I mean, it literally is true that everybody else is subject to this. And I think as technology advances and as industries change, enforcement has to keep up with that. I don't want anyone to think that this is punitive. But it is fair that our VIOs have the same enforcement capabilities as everybody else out there, especially because they're doing their best to keep our roads clear and safe. What DC agencies does DoorDash interact with most frequently?
I mean, I can't speak to that specifically. I mean, I can say in my time at DoorDash, I mean, we have had a number of meetings with DDOT, DOES, particularly on a number of different issues.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that laws and regulations of this industry should be consolidated under DFHV? I
mean, I think we would probably, that would probably warrant a much larger conversation. I mean, I think that between DOES and DDOT, I mean, we are probably regulated to a certain extent that is probably adequate.
What's the breakdown of DoorDash orders in DC delivered by cars as opposed to bikes, mopeds, or walking?
I can say that no more than 2% of deliveries are done by bike. And that figure probably is very skewed because there are a lot of folks who maybe have done a bike delivery at one point and never toggled it back to doing a car. So I would actually say it's not many at all. And I think, a lot of the reason for that is just the way the city is currently constructed and the fact that, you know, folks would also just rather use their car.
Mhm. Oh, what about mopeds?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's in the same boat as bikes at this point. I mean, we do not have the, I mean, you've also got to realize, I mean, each dasher, they can dash how they choose.
So
So
they
it's
don't
not-
necessarily say today I'm mopeding.
Exactly, yeah. So,
Okay.
and it's on them. I mean, it, you know, we can't determine for them what kind of car they use, whether they walk, what, you know, that's not, it's beyond our control.
For sure. It just would be useful data.
Mhm.
So is that something you might consider tracking or asking them to share?
I mean, I think we already asked them to share that. The question is like, how accurate is that?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, how inaccurate do you think it is?
Probably pretty accurate, inaccurate.
Okay. Is that something that is a priority for you all in terms of having that accurate data?
I mean, I think if it's less than 2%
Mhm.
across the board, it's probably not the top priority right now. I will say there are some markets where, I mean, delivery on bike, delivery on moped, delivery on scooter has definitely taken off.
Yeah.
Much more than here in DC. Through for probably a variety of different reasons. I mean, you know, different jurisdictions provide different incentives to do so. But I mean, that's something that obviously, you know, we're constantly working with our dashers, you know, on all aspects of what being a delivery driver is, and obviously would be happy to have those discussions with them, at least the ones that we communicate directly with.
What are some of the incentives that other jurisdictions use?
I mean, I think some jurisdictions are, you know, providing incentives by way of tax breaks to purchase a bike, to repair the bike or moped or scooter. And I think it's just much more widespread as far as the adoption rate
In
those
big
localities.
cities as well?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so it's something we could consider. What are your recommendations for the district's pickup, drop off and curbside management programs?
I mean, it's been a little while since I've talked to DDOT about this. I know that this was a top issue for them at one time. But I mean, I think that, you know, looking at the different areas, you know, we had a meeting here at the council on Tuesday with a dasher where she was talking about how the majority of the deliveries that she does are in Navy Yard. And there might be some pickup and drop off locations, but they're definitely inadequate. There are not enough of them. There are too many delivery drivers picking up and dropping off in that area for what is actually available. And then, I mean, she also just noted though too, like that's also just an area where they have them, right? Like there's a lot of areas that don't have them at all. And I mean, I just think it's something that we should be looking at. And, you know, obviously we want to work with you, with the city, to help try to solve that problem ultimately, because
Yeah.
it's something we hear from dashers a lot.
For sure. And it's a kind of an interesting position here for the committee, because in order to properly address many of the issues you're encountering, we actually need to add regulatory authority over DoorDash and related companies. So you can see it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg, and we're trying to address that properly by putting the right measures in place.
I mean, I think, you know, I mean, our door is open.
Okay.
We're always happy to talk. I mean, I've been meeting with the council. I've been at DoorDash now for over 2 years, so I'm always willing to sit down and explain to you, you know, how the business works. I know we have a dasher here today that was hoping to get to connect with you as a part of the proceedings.
Great.
But
I had a dasher at my house last night,
Yeah.
so I definitely understand the model and I appreciate the work. Okay, and what has your interaction been with Department for Hire Vehicles so far?
mine directly, none.
None. Okay.
But I think that, you know, that's also something I think that I would encourage you to talk to dashers about, because clearly they have had those interactions. And I mean, you know, DoorDash, we've got a three-sided marketplace, you know, restaurants, customers, and dashers. As it pertains to the proceedings here today, I mean, we are here speaking on behalf of the dashers, because without any one side of that marketplace, the service does not operate.
Did any of the dashers who are here today want to come up and give testimony? Feel free to come on up. Right now.
Thank you, ma'am.
Go ahead, just hit your button right there and you can go ahead and let us know your name.
Good morning. My name is Isaiah Keith.
Isaiah Keith. Very good.
Thank you, committee, for allowing me, delivery drivers like me, to come out and share our perspective on these new rules. My name is Isaiah Keefe, and I started making deliveries with DoorDash about 3 years ago. The problem that I found myself getting more parking tickets lately when making deliveries. I've racked up thousands of dollars in parking tickets just while I'm out dashing. It feels like if you're a second late coming out of the restaurant, there's a parking ticket waiting for you. Delivery workers like me are already getting hit with more tickets, but it hasn't solved the problem. All it has done is make us feel like we're unfair, an unfair target for doing our job. I definitely don't want to be blocking traffic when I'm picking up and dropping off orders. I started actually doing deliveries on a bike, and I was really frustrated to see cars stopped where they weren't supposed to be. But now I see that it's just because there's just aren't enough spaces designed for cars to park. The parking situation has gotten so bad in DC that I've started doing more deliveries across the river in Virginia because I've never gotten a ticket over there. I feel bad because I know a lot of people I'm dropping off orders to in my neighborhood are already elderly or don't have a car or transportation to receive the services that they're looking for. And I just can't afford to keep getting ticketed. I do my best to pay the fines from the tickets off on time, but my expenses continue to pile up. I need to make sure that I'm able to pay rent, keep up with bills, and provide for my kids all at the same time. And each time you miss a payment, as you know, in the District of Columbia, your ticket, it doubles. Your ticket actually doubles. Thinking about that, if you were choosing between paying another parking ticket or feeding your family, which one would you actually pick? So I hope you remember hardworking people like me in the district who are just trying to support their families, and I hope you oppose these new rules.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I wanted to ask you, what made you switch from bike to car for your deliveries?
Well, sometimes doing deliveries, you get a longer commute on the bike. So at the time, I wasn't receiving tickets on my bike, so I was able to save more money.
Sure.
Being so I have kids, I really can't commute with my kids on a bike, so I actually needed a car.
Yeah.
So after working on the bike for a year or two, I saved up enough money to actually get me to buy a car.
That's great. That's
Thank you.
great. I hear you. And I do think your issue speaks to the need for more pickup drop-off zones. Is most of the ticketing happening to you when you're in sort of more of a commercial area, actually picking up the food, or when you're dropping off?
Yeah, it happens more when you're in the commercial area actually picking up the food. Sometimes it happens when you're dropping off, depending on the location that you're actually dropping off at. Like
Yeah.
down here, you can get a ticket
Sure.
dropping off down here.
Yeah.
But you mostly get ticketed when you're picking up the food.
Makes sense. And tracks with sort of what we've seen in the neighborhoods too. I think the issue of what we call curbside management and what the different spaces are available for is very much at play here. Similar to what Ms. Case was talking about, there needs to be a different space for each type of use along the curb. Otherwise, we have these conflicts and unfortunately have to do enforcement to resolve them. So something we'll keep working on with the Department of Transportation, and we have a hearing with the deputy mayor next week too, where we can bring all these things together.
Okay.
Thank you very
having me.
much for your
Thank you for my
testimony. Did anybody else in the audience want to testify before we move to our final questions for the witnesses on this panel? Okay, so Ms. Baca, I know you're well aware of the issues council's having with the executive not releasing a required study of congestion pricing. Do you know if that study could shed a light on demand-based pricing for for-hire vehicles that I proposed in the budget last year?
So the study was primarily conducted pre-pandemic. It needs to be updated. That's what the T&E committee required in the BSA, as you're familiar with. I would hope that an updated study could more directly address TNCs, which were, I think, just less less zeitgeisty, quite frankly, in 2019. So the updates are really, really needed. That said, I think there's probably some like information that you can extract from what's in the report already in terms of just where people are going, right? Which I think TNC trips like do tend to track with that. So there's valuable information in there. An update is really, really needed. If the report had come out, I would hope that we would be talking about this issue in terms of like either like future study or how to incorporate TNCs into a road pricing program and actually analyzing that. We're not at that point yet, unfortunately, but I do think there's a lot of valuable information and a lot of more prompts for questioning. We do need to study more. I hate saying like we need to study more, but we do in this case. And that's something that I think could be really additive to this conversation. And I would hope that we could make policy with that information available to the public.
How would you propose we balance the need to make sure delivery drivers are not negatively impacting road safety versus a delivery worker's economic well-being?
More regulation. I think you nailed it in your back and forth with DoorDash's representative is that for a lot of the things that we need to make things easier for drivers, the district needs greater regulatory authority over them. Design can help, right? I have been banging pots and pans about PUDOs for years. My frustration with DDOT for not spending as much time on PUDOs as they should is well documented. Design can help, certainly. We can always have better design. We need more curbside space for pickup drop off, for delivery. I am totally supportive of that. At the same time, if we don't want to burden individual drivers for, sort of the sins of the structure in which we are existing, the district needs to be able to treat them on the same level as taxis and limousines. Again, I agree with you. I think this is a carve out. I don't think that it's an additional burden to regulate delivery companies. So that sort of levels the playing field. It allows the district to look at things in totality as opposed to saying, well, we can't touch this in the same way. So I think that's a really, really important feature. I'm sympathetic. I get it. Parking tickets are awful and it sucks to have to operate your vehicle in a particular way because of the design of our roadways, get a ticket and have that knock out your earnings. Like that sucks. I totally, totally get that. At the same time, we need to move to a different structure, like so that we're not forcing drivers to park illegally and also so that the district can more directly communicate and regulate the actions of delivery drivers.
You noted that Neighborhood Connect is too duplicative of Metrobus. Should we flip that script and think about whether it might be a better transit option for some areas than a standard bus route?
I think there's value in conceptualizing it differently. I think we should also be wary of microtransit, though. I like microtransit sounds great on paper. The idea of like we can just pick people up in a small, efficient vehicle and take them to where they need to go. It doesn't scale super well, so I don't know how to change that fundamental fact, but I do think that looking at where there are actual gaps in our transportation system is probably a better place for a school connect, or sorry, neighborhood connect. And I appreciate the shift in ideology there.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate your testimony. Thank you to this panel. At this point, I'd like to call our government witnesses to testify. Representing Department of For Hire Vehicles today is Keith Anderson, the Deputy Mayor for Operations and Infrastructure, as well as key agency staff. Thought I did. Sorry. Okay. Keith Anderson, Deputy Mayor for Operations and Infrastructure. Nikisha Sanders Small, General Counsel of the Department of For Hire Vehicles. Faye Daskai, Senior Policy Advisor, Department of For Hire Vehicles. And Travis Nemhard, Enforcement Program Manager, Department of For Hire Vehicles. I believe all of whom are joining us on the Zoom. Yes. Thank you. Really appreciate you coming out to testify, Ms. Case. It's nice to see you. Okay, before we begin, I need everybody to raise their right hand and unmute. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give to the Committee on Public Works and Operations is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I do.
I do.
Travis, are you frozen? No.
No,
you're
I said,
not.
I said I
Oh,
do.
sorry. Okay.
No
Sorry.
problem.
I know you're probably the three of you in the same room, so you're trying to avoid feedback. I understand. Okay. Very good. So, Deputy Mayor, you may begin your testimony when you're ready.
Thank you, council member. And I want to apologize in advance for any ambient noise in the back. But thank you nonetheless. Good morning, Chairperson Nadeau and members of the committee. I'm Keith Anderson, Deputy Mayor for Operations and Infrastructure, testifying on behalf of Mayor Bowser and on the Department for Hired Vehicles performance over the past fiscal year and the current fiscal year to date. I am here today as the mayor continues her search for a new permanent director for Department for Hired Vehicles. Before I begin, I want to thank the staff at DFHV for their continued hard work this year. DFHV has an important role to play in DC's comeback. For hire industry and taxi industry are a vital part of our transportation system. However, these industries have faced difficult pressures and have continued their slow recovery post-pandemic. Taxis in particular have grappled with heightened competition from rideshare companies and subsequently contended with the industry downturn during the COVID pandemic. Over the past year, DFHV has focused on implementing various initiatives to aid the taxi industry in its recovery. Some examples are increasing the taxi fare in keeping with our neighboring jurisdictions to support economic sustainability and promote fair competition in the market. Increasing the vehicle age limit so drivers and companies can keep their vehicles in service longer before having to purchase a new vehicle. And removing outdated requirements such as physicals for license applications, and mostly important, making it easy for newly licensed drivers by introducing the option to pay in installments. Since the beginning of the fiscal year, DFHV has worked on updating its regulations, and its taxi fare and vehicle age adjustments are now moving through the regulatory process. These are changes that the taxi industry asked for and specifically noted in the petition the agency received from approximately 480 taxi drivers in August of 2023. The policy changes made by the agency will help taxi drivers and companies better compete in the swiftly changing for hired industry or market. Another way the agency is supporting the taxi industry is through improving how drivers and passengers connect. This was one of the topics that was discussed during the previous performance oversight hearing. I'm happy to announce that the agency launched a universal e-hail pilot last April, offering grant funding to companies and working with them to find app-based solutions that work for everyone. Since then, the e-hailing app Curb has hired recruiters who have added more drivers to its app. This grant has helped add 75 new drivers during the past year, and the agency aims to collaborate with the company to onboard even more drivers to the app this year. As DFHV diligently advances these initiatives to bolster the industry, it concurrently holds the for-hire industry to high standards through enforcement and education. In fiscal year 23, vehicle inspection officers issued 9,433 notices of infractions. This is a 62% increase from the previous fiscal year. That thanks to a federal grant, officers have dedicated additional hours to ensure for hired vehicle drivers navigate district streets with the utmost safety. Safety remains a paramount priority for DFHV. DFHV's client services continue the agency's effort to educate for hire drivers about road safety. Taxi drivers are required to complete Vision Zero training when they are obtaining new licenses or renewing their licenses. The agency has also explored ways to enhance accessibility for the riding public
within the for-hire industry and its programs. DFHV established a wheelchair accessibility vehicle working group to investigate initiatives undertaken by peer cities aimed at creating a more accessible for-hire industry. The working group is brainstorming several strategies to incentivize WAVE, or wheelchair accessible vehicles drivers, through a combination of incentives and dispatch strategies. We're excited to share these strategies with you once our plan is finalized. Concurrently, the agency is conducting a survey amongst existing WAVE drivers to gain insight into the challenges and opportunities in this space. Along with their four mission initiatives, DFHV's programs continue to serve district-wide goals while promoting increased mobility opportunities for taxi drivers to earn additional income. DC School Connect has been working hard to serve safe passage schools in Wards 7 and 8 and has consistently fully enrolled. The agency also added new and expanded transportation partnerships for OSSI's workforce training programs. DFHV's partner agencies have noted increased demand for these programs, and they are a win-win for both the industry and district residents. DFHV is deeply committed to the well-being of the community it serves and the vitality of the industry it oversees. DFHV's management and staff consistently seek avenues for enhancing the quality of life for district residents through transportation programs. I am extremely impressed by DFHV's dedicated staff and their commitment to public service as they work through the many challenges facing the for-hire industry. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the work of the industry's stakeholders, including the For-Hire Vehicle Advisory Council and the Accessibility Advisory Council for their passion. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the agency's performance, and I welcome any questions that you and the committee may have, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. I want to start with some rapid fire questions based on the testimony we just heard. We asked staff to review testimony we received from a John Doe about VIOs. Do you agree with the recommendation that VIOs should be designated as law enforcement officers, or are they considered that already?
I'll turn it to Keisha for that.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor and Councilmember Che. I'm sorry, apologies. I was having a flashback from my DPW day seeing Deputy Mayor.
That's okay. It's a
Gibson.
compliment. Okay.
Great. I think we all agree, Chair Nadeau. At this point, DFHV is very proud of the work that our enforcement team provides. As you know, they provide enforcement for our regulatory scheme. So at this point, unless we get guidance, otherwise, the agency is pretty pleased with the enforcement under the scheme that our VIOs currently provide.
Do you support making their retirement benefits commensurate with MPD and FEMS?
Deputy Mayor, would you like me to answer that, or?
That was definitely something we need to look into, Madam Chair. But Nikisha, please elaborate.
I agree with the Deputy Mayor. That is something that we would have to discuss internally and also speak with relevant stakeholders and all of our partners in the government to assess if that is appropriate, given what's happening in the district and whatnot. So we're not in a position to fully answer that at this time, but we'll certainly circle back.
What's your response to Michael Havlin's testimony about the lack of enforcement of disparities east of the river? Is this a problem with the data you get from TNCs? And how detailed is it?
Yeah, I did hear his testimony, and that I am concerned, but as in my testimony, our enforcement has increased by 62% over the last year. We'll continue to listen to those concerns, talk to our team to address those concerns as we move forward.
It's increased by 62% regarding the disparities in pickup?
Our enforcement increased by 62% from the previous year in terms of notices of infractions.
Okay.
How we break that down, I would have to get back to you on that. But we are increasing enforcement. We're also increasing our education. But we will continue to look at those instances east of the river and, quite frankly, in other parts of the city as well.
Do you have the data that he's talking about from TNCs?
Travis, I would have to defer to you on that.
So the data is limited as it relates to the TNCs, as you alluded to, Chairwoman. We do have request time and pickup time.
Okay.
And so that can maybe help us assess the wait time. But we would need to touch base with our technology team to see the full scope of what we could get.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Now I have some questions in response to your testimony, Deputy Mayor, and the overall state of affairs. When are the fare increases and rulemakings you described in testimony planned to be final?
I'm sorry, Nikisha or Faye, could you elaborate on that, please?
Absolutely. Deputy Mayor, I was waiting for your direction. As the Deputy Mayor stated in his testimony, the search for a new director is ongoing. And as you know, we require someone to be appointed for those to become final. So we are awaiting guidance for that, but we will certainly let you know as soon as we're able to make those final and permanent.
What is the Department for Hire Vehicles doing to hold illegal rideshare operators accountable?
Travis.
Thanks for the question. So what we are doing to hold illegal rideshare operators accountable is essentially if our officers verify that it's illegal, we impound the vehicle. Obviously, it's a public safety concern that a vehicle is operating unlicensed in the district. Additionally, we take steps to essentially look at the patterns of for-hire activity to assess whether a vehicle is operating as a for-hire, but is not actually licensed to do so.
And what do you think the risks and harms are posed by these companies?
There's, as I mentioned, public safety concerns. There's a lack of regulation. There's no requirements as to things such as making sure that the companies adequately verify the identity of the operators, issues around driver's licenses and registration, that sort of thing, which are basic traffic requirements. There's also the issue around making sure that they have a robust complaint process to handle issues around consumer protection issues. There's a myriad of other challenges that come with not having any form of regulatory scheme available for a company.
How do we catch these companies earlier in the future? It seems like Empower has been able to operate for quite a while before seeing consequences.
So we actually found Empower through our enforcement team. We discovered them very early on in the process. It's actually largely because it's a novel issue that it went through a robust legal process, and it's still on appeal currently. I can pass over to the General Counsel if she wants to talk more about that. But with the circumstances, if there are substantially similar circumstances moving forward, again, it's through the legal process. It's presumed that it won't be quite as long. But historically, what our officers do is they look at the practices of the for-hire operators, and we use the same practices we do when we have someone who, for example, is operating without a trade dress, but they should, or food parcel delivery operators that are currently operating right now and have no other forms of identifiers. So our officers are trained in being able to identify those types of vehicles and those operators. And that's the same sort of practice that we employ when trying to determine whether there's a company or operator that's operating unlawfully and unlicensed in the district.
Thank you.
And if I'm apologies, we had some technical difficulties. Travis is absolutely correct. The enforcement team plays one part, and we work in tandem with that office, with the Office of General Counsel. Empower is indeed a novel situation. They're not the first new entrant to the for-hire industry in the District of Columbia. It's just they're the only ones that was resistant to the operating authority requirements. We worked with them extensively so that they could come under our authority, and they rejected that. Immediately after we issued them a compliance order, our recourse at the time was to file at Office of Administrative Hearings, which we did, and through that entire process, because we issued them a cease and desist order. That process went through the entire appellate, multiple orders, and we won. Currently, we have two ongoing matters pending against Empower at this point, one at the Court of Appeals and another at Office of Superior Court, where we've sought an injunction. So I wanted to make sure it is clear that DFHV is doing everything we can to bring them within our regulatory authority, while at the same time enforcing them on the ground with Travis's team.
Thank you. That's very helpful to get those specifics. There seems to have been a sudden decline in the number of active taxi drivers at the beginning of this year. It went from about 1,600 last October to 1,300 this month, which is lower than it's been since 2022. What's the cause of that decline?
You're absolutely correct, Madam Chair. There is a decline in taxi drivers. As a matter of fact, taxi drivers make up about, correct me if I'm wrong, team, 7 to 8% of all for hired vehicles. I'll let the team elaborate on some of the specificity around that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. The numbers we provided to you in the performance oversight hearing responses were taken from a real-time database. When we provided the data, that number was around 1,300. And as of yesterday, that number actually increased. As of yesterday, February 15, that number has actually increased to 1,382. If we wait until the end of February, until March 1st, we can look at February numbers. You can have a picture of complete picture of February numbers. So if we wait until February 29, then that number will go up.
Also like to say kudos to the team because they listened to the taxi drivers. As I said in my testimony, we did get a petition from approximately, I think it was 480 taxi drivers on things that were impediments to them becoming drivers, like the physical and like the upfront payment. So the team listened, made some changes, and now we're seeing the numbers go in the right direction.
What vacancies at DFHV are priorities to fill within the next quarter?
I'll let Travis talk about the VIOs. I think we have 4 vacancies there. And Madam Chair, I do know that there was testimony about the permanent director for hired vehicles, and I do look forward to the mayor making an announcement on a permanent selection in the very near future. But Travis, you want to elaborate on the officers?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. So as the Deputy Mayor had alluded to, right now we are backfilling 4 vehicle inspection officer positions and 1 paralegal position, and we're going to continue to monitor revenue and continue backfilling wherever possible. But those are the 5 total priority areas for backfilling those vacancies.
What about the hearing examiner and court clerk positions in the hearing office?
Yeah, so the hearing examiner, the hearing office conducts hearings, adjudications, appeals, and forms of conflict resolution, including mediation. That's been done, something that was done in the past. Actually, I was the last hearing examiner that we had. And essentially what we did was for purposes around the issues regarding the pandemic for synergies and cost saving measures. We have worked with Office of Administrative Hearings to handle many of those cases that we've historically managed, and that is something that OAH, prior to the delegation of that authority to our agency, has been historically managed by OAH. Additionally, DMV, this is just additional information, but DMV does handle Title 18 violations, which is under a mayor's order. So that's slightly different, but as it relates to the Office of Hearing Examiners, that all of that has been delegated to OAH.
Can you remind me what Title 18 covers?
Traffic safety violations, essentially.
Very good. Thank you. Did any staff get detailed to OAH?
No.
Any idea what that caseload is?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
what's the caseload that moved from Department for Hire Vehicles to OAH with that transition?
The size? It varies, but I would have to get back to you on the specifics as it relates to the numbers. I don't want to give you a wrong estimate, but it did vary depending on the years. And as you can imagine, the reason we decided to move over was because there was a significant drop with the pandemic in activity. And so the hearing office was at almost a standstill when we actually transitioned it over due to lack of drivers. And so I'm sure that numbers have changed since the recovery has occurred, but we can try to work with your office to get you whatever data you need.
The reason I ask is simply because we tend to add responsibility to OAH without adding staff, which then slows down case resolution for all our agencies. So I just want to make sure that we're adequately staffing that. Okay, to refer to Q35 in pre-hearing responses. The 5,700 taxi drivers on your distribution list, is that the entire universe of registered taxi drivers?
Thank you, Councilmember. Deputy Mayor, would you like to respond to that question?
Please, by all means, please go ahead.
Yes, okay, thank you. I can take that question. Yes, so our Gov Delivery pulls from the list that we have. Currently, we have 3,500 active taxi drivers. That means taxi drivers that have an active registration. They may not be active 100% of the time. They may only use the taxi. They may only drive once a week. They may be on a long vacation. So we pull from that list. The 5,700 includes email addresses for taxi drivers that current and past taxi drivers. Some of the taxi drivers may not be driving anymore, but we don't eliminate anyone from the list, just to make sure that we outreach, that our outreach extends to all the taxi drivers that are currently in the district.
Just to confirm, the agency doesn't have the ability to communicate directly with sedan class operators like Uber and Lyft drivers?
That's a good question. No, we don't get, TNCs don't provide email addresses for the drivers, TNC drivers to us. However, some TNC drivers may voluntarily share their information with us. In that case, they only get newsletter information from DFH.
Is that something that is desirable? I mean, is that the sort of thing where DFHV could do sort of a campaign to get more TNC drivers signed up? Or is it just not that important?
I'll take that, Chair Nadeau. As with anything, our goal is to make sure that we have the most robust for hire industry as possible. So any opportunity to reach more drivers in that industry, we would definitely welcome that.
In terms of your direct communication, is the same true of carriers for hire?
That's correct.
Okay. Moving to question 37, is the Bus Boss software only used for School Connect?
Yes, we believe that's correct.
Could it be used for other programs like Neighborhood Connect?
I can take that question. So that software system provides routing and GPS tracking specifically for transporting students. It does not have dispatch functionality, and it's limited in the functions and features that it has.
And what are the software integration issues the agencies encountered?
We'll have to get back to you on that question. We'll circle back with you.
I have a few questions about agency MOU that you provided in question 5. There's an MOU with DDOT for private vehicle for hire data sharing and enhanced traffic safety outreach. Can someone explain more about that?
Thank you, Councilmember. I can take that question. Each quarter, the private for-hire companies submit trip data to DFHV required by the statute. DFHV then shares the data with DDOT. The interagency MOU specifies cost sharing for DFHV's data collection, data validation, and storage.
What's the point of that? Sorry, I'm not to be dense, but what does that mean?
So the agency gets the data from for-hire vehicle companies, then verifies the data, quality checks the data, and then stores the data and data in a platform online and shares the data with DDOT. So we can use the data for a variety of reasons. First of all, understand the number of trips that TNCs are taking and compare that with number of trips that taxis are taking. That's how we know what the market share is. DDOT can use the data to for curbside management purposes. However, I have to note that the data that TNCs provide the data is 3 decimal points granularity in the district and 2 decimal points in urban areas. So for instance, using the data, DDOT can tell that a pickup drop-off happened at a specific intersection. It's not feasible to determine what corner in that intersection or what block face. And that's because according to the statute, TNCs are required to provide data with a certain specificity.
Do you know if DDOT does much with the data in terms of curbside management? And has it guided any policy changes?
It's a good question for DDOT. But we do provide the data for DDOT. And I mean, there are, and as I noted,
let me ask it differently.
The
Have you
granularity of the data is something that DDOT has also had concerns with.
Let me ask it differently. Have you seen any policy changes that have come out of that data review?
And that's, again, that's a good question for DDOT as far as the pickup drop-off zones and how they are determined along the curbside.
How much better would the data be with more decimal points for our purposes? Fewer decimal points?
We can circle back with that, but I can tell that if agencies like DDOT have more decimal points, they can exactly determine where the pickup drop-off happens alongside the curb, and that makes it easier for determine pickup drop-off spots along a specific block face.
Okay. I want to know more about the MOU with the Office of Unified Communications for radio communications support. Is that exclusively for VIOs?
Yes, that's exclusively for VIOs, but it's also exclusively for enforcement activities. So VIOs will communicate with MPD through the citywide channel via the OUC.
Are there some limitations to that? I remember on my ride along, there was, I believe, a complaint about not being able to use the same channel as some others, which could potentially slow down some dispatch.
Yeah, I think what you're probably alluding to is the more granular district-based communications, right? Right now we use a citywide channel, and so that channel goes out to you know the entire district. So our access is limited currently.
Is there a desire to access the other channels?
We are interested. We're always open to working with our sister agencies to find a way to collaborate to increase efficiency around communications. I will say that right now, as it currently stands, we're able to effectively do our job, and I think that's most important.
Has there ever been a time when a VIO needed access to a different channel and there was a negative consequence for not having it?
Not to my knowledge.
The MOU for installing electric charging at Union Station, is that specifically for taxi cabs?
Yes.
Can you discuss the joint enforcement operations planned for this year with DCA Airport Police?
Yes, DFHB periodically trains with different organizations and groups to help make sure that for hire enforcement is as robust as possible. And so one of those is through DCA, given that we often train the National Airport Police on how to approach and handle for hire activity. We also conduct in-field joint operations in which we provide feedback to those officers, given the specialized nature of the work of our VIOs. We also do the same with MPD. We're working on doing something with Park Police as well.
The grant for taxi cab, for interactive taxi cab lights seems to have been successful. Can you talk more about that and whether there are plans to continue that program in the next fiscal year?
Yes, I can take that question. So we are very pleased by the positive reception of the new taxi cab lights. The new lights are easier to read and can show PSAs that the agency wants. Currently, we have a grant available to taxi companies to purchase more lights. The application's deadline is actually due at midnight tonight.
Great. What's the explanation for the changes in passenger surcharges collected as you provide in your answer to question 9?
Okay.
I can take that question. Are you referring to the fare adjustment?
This is your response to question 9. And in September 2022, for instance, there was almost 150,000, and then in some months there's nothing. It's
Yes.
listed as passenger surcharges.
Thank you for clarifying it.
Yeah.
So the charges are due to the timing of when the revenue is recorded in the system. So therefore, the FY 2022 September revenue was higher because the August revenue was actually recorded in September.
Thank you. What explains the significant increase in special event permit fee revenue in FY 23? It increased from 300,000 in FY 22 to over 1.3 million.
Yes, I can take that. So this budget line item increase, this revenue increase has to do with the new permits for NDLs or non-district limousine applications. We have observed an increase in applications for this category, and this is largely attributed to increased activities after the pandemic, post-pandemic.
What is, did you say NDL?
Yes.
What does that stand for?
Non-district limousine applications. Sorry, I might have said license plate. Non-district limousine applications. These are the limousine companies that are based outside of the district, and they obtain a permit to operate in the district.
Why is that special event permit fee revenue?
excuse me, they're a special permit revenue because they aren't ordinarily allowed to operate in the district, so they must pay a fee for to operate, and it's generally during a special event in the district. For instance, maybe inauguration or the balls and anything that would attract limousine drivers and an increased usage of limousines. So that it drives revenue for special events. That's the special permit revenue.
Got it. So if you're just going to come in for the day, you don't get licensed in DC, you pay a special fee.
I'm not certain about the period, if it's a day, but what we do know is if they're not a licensed district limousine, meaning they want their Maryland-based limousine company and they want to access our residents in our area, then we do provide them the opportunity through the purchase of a special permit.
Got it.
Yeah.
What's the anticipated increase in revenue from doubling the passenger fare surcharge from 25 to 50 cents? And does the agency have a proposed use for those funds?
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, so the fare increase will double the revenue collected from taxi surcharge. In 2023, the agency collected about $570,000 from taxi surcharge. And then since that number went from per trip from 25 cents to 50 cents, the total revenue will increase by that $570,000 if the number of rides remain the same compared to last year. The agency is proposing to use this additional funding to support transportation programs in underserved areas and promote the availability of wheelchair accessible vehicles.
What initiatives does DFHV plan with the new $500,000 WAVE fund, and how much trial and error are you prepared for?
That is a good question. As you know, since the previous performance oversight hearing, we have been working internally, as the Deputy Mayor mentioned, to study what other cities have been doing, what are the peer cities doing, what's the right mixture of incentives, and what actually moves the needle. So in the previous year, we spoke with the city of Winnipeg, we spoke with city of Chicago. We also had working groups with the drivers, WAV drivers, to understand their feedback and where they're coming from. And we shared this information in the previous, the last AAC meeting, which was one of the, I would say, the most successful meetings we've had in a very long time. We were able to add 3 additional blind individuals to the AAC, the list of AAC members. We shared with the advisory, with the Accessibility Advisory Committee, that we're planning on, we're exploring a variety of incentive structures to drivers, because as we already mentioned and as it's been discussed, the lack of drivers after peak hour is an issue right now. And last year, we also did look at the data to see how many number of VAVs are available during certain hours of the time. And Ms. Case, in her testimony, she's absolutely correct. The availability reduces during peak hours after 4 p.m. And we are exploring a series of incentives, a tiered structure, incentive strategy, but it's not finalized yet. And we're happy to send you the final plan. We're near completion of figuring out what the pilot program that we're going to use the fundings for look like. We're happy to send you the final program structure once we finalize it.
And if I may add, Chair Nadeau, in our very thorough and deep analysis and comparisons, what we've learned from our internal analysis is it's not necessarily the number of WAVs that exist currently in the existing companies, but it is the amount that are used by drivers. So even in our numbers, when you look at the percentage rate, which I know gets a lot of attention by many of our stakeholders, what we've realized is it's not that percentage. What we need to focus on is figuring out the right incentive to get the drivers to drive the WAVs that currently
Yeah.
exist that often sit idle. And when we break down those numbers, you'll see even with some where the percentage is sorely low. When you look at the number of registered WAVs, it's 50% or greater that are sitting idle. So what we're focusing on is finding the right balance of incentives that will not only attract the drivers to drive those WAVs, but to do it at the hours after hours, where folks like Heidi Kaysen and the like can go to the Kennedy Center and go to dinner. That is something that the employees of this agency feel really deeply, and we are working extremely hard to address that solution. So we expect to provide some really good information, some new programs, initiatives that we'll be providing very soon. And we just wanted to make sure that we reiterate the point that we believe we've identified the real crux of the matter, and we're working on it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but I feel like a year ago, we knew this. Because the agency Department for Hire Vehicles was able to say, oh, well, with their roster, this company is in compliance. The issue has always been the cars out on the road. And I think the AAC has been saying that for years. So I don't want us to pat ourselves on the back that you spent the October, November, December, January, and half of February determining something that we kind of already knew. I really just want to see, what these incentives are going to be. And I look forward to seeing that pilot that you're about to give us.
And Madam Chair, what we're going to do is, as you were prompted to for the technical issues, we're going to use our General Counsel Nikisha's mic. That way we're not fumbling back and forth, given how close we are in proximity. So just wanted to note that for you.
Great. And so then she'll remain unmuted and everyone can just talk freely, other than the deputy mayor. Uh-oh. Still hear feedback.
Okay. We'll stick with the current structure.
Well, also just only one computer should have any volume on, right? So you may have already done that, but every laptop should be on mute except for one. Okay, the audio should be on mute. Yeah. Okay. All right. So you've mentioned positive examples of cities like Chicago and Winnipeg. What are they doing to encourage WAVE adoption that you hope to emulate?
All right. Okay, I can take this. So as I mentioned, we spoke with Chicago, we spoke with the city of Winnipeg recently, actually a couple of months ago, and a couple of things. Both cities have took time to build up their universal dispatch platform, including training drivers, ensuring all technical and meter integration matters are resolved. Drivers understand that they need to turn on the app, educating drivers, and achieving customer satisfaction, which is something that defines success in launching a successful e-hail system. Additionally, as you mentioned, council member, there will be try and error. For instance, city of Winnipeg, they changed their incentive structures a couple of times to ensure that not only passengers, but not only the agency staff, but also the drivers can fully understand how much they get for during what hours of the day. Is it performance-based? Is it hourly-based? Issues like that. What I forgot to mention also was that we also discussed this with the companies, just to understand the company's perspective and where the companies are coming from. So we're very close to finalizing our plans. Again, we're happy to share those plans with you once our plans are finalized.
Thank you very much. All right. So on a certain level, I can understand the logic behind continuing to relax the WAVE fleet requirements from 20% to 12%. But as you provide in your answer, there are a few companies that still are only at 1 or 2%, and it seems like incentives alone are not going to get a company from 1% to 12 or 20%. At what point do those companies that are way out of compliance need to face penalties?
So the current penalty, the only penalty that we have for a failure to honor that percentage is to deny operating authority. If we were to invoke that penalty, then the numbers that you highlighted earlier, the numbers of taxi drivers that are available would decrease even more. So what we're trying to do is to find the solution that maintains the number of taxi drivers that we have in the entirety of the district, while providing the right incentive that works in this district with these drivers and in our market.
Why isn't there sort of an intermediate penalty?
Currently in our regulations, that is the penalty that exists for us. We are able to, in our experience, what we did initially, as you learned when you first came on, we did an internal market to analysis to determine the numbers that worked based on the market at the time, the availability, and the requests that we were getting. So that has adjusted. So we are working now to find the right mix of WAVs that are available versus the demand that's necessary. I believe Ms. Case testified earlier that the drivers that participate in Transport DC, that is working well. So now we're focused on where the gap is. If we were to enforce that operating authority, it wouldn't just affect the lack of available WAVs in the evening, but it would affect the ones in Transport DC. This law affects companies. So if we were to enforce it, it pulls the entire company down. So that
I
would
understand. I guess I was asking why we don't have something different, especially if we're in the process of rewriting the regs right now. Why wouldn't we give Department of For Hire Vehicles some sort of intermediate enforcement tool?
That is something that we should probably explore. But if we're able to develop the incentives that work the way that we believe our robust research and analysis has done, then it might benefit us to maintain the hammer that we have. We're confident that the work that we have done and that the solution that we will reveal soon will meet the demand. We're happy to circle back should that not be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but you're saying here publicly you're never going to use the hammer. So it's not much of a hammer. And, you know, right, the hammer would undermine the entire industry. So let's make sure we have the right hammers while we're also creating the incentives. This is like a pretty classic structure. I'm not saying you have to use it. If your incentives get us where we need to go, that's great. I hope they do. I hope the $500,000 we put in is a great start that we can build on. But, you know, you're already in progress here. Let's make sure you're getting the most out of this regulatory reform.
We are certainly in agreement with you.
Okay. We learned from the most recent Accessibility Advisory Council meeting that 3 taxi companies combined have 50% of the total wave fleet. Is that an indication that percentage of individual fleets may not be the best approach to wave requirements?
That is a complicated question. I'm sure you appreciate that. As we are exploring our market and what makes sense, it's possible that the fleet or the company, the current definition may not get to where we need to be. Because since we provided the pre-hearing questions, our most recent analysis reflects a change because once they fall under that definition, they no longer would merit repeating or including in that answer. So we may need to, as we implement some of your suggestions and look for a mix of penalties, that may be something we need to look into as well.
Can you say that a different way? I'm sorry, I wasn't quite following. Since you sent the questions, something happened?
There was an adjustment in the companies that meet the requirement for the wave percentage.
What does that mean?
If they are no longer registered a certain number of taxis, they no longer meet the requirement, the threshold that mandates they have the certain percentage of WAVs.
Oh, I see.
So we can send those updated figures to you. But what I'm saying is there may be a number of changes that we need to implement. And that may be one of them.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Certainly.
In response to question 14, there was a pilot grant program for wave repairs in FY '23. How did that go? I see Yellow Cab appears to not have used any of the 42,000 in their wave repair grant.
Yes, I can take that question. So Yellow Cab did manage to submit a list of vehicles that were repaired under the program, but their paperwork was on the cusp of the FI close. Therefore, the data captured at the time of reporting did not include that. But once staff reviewed the paperwork that they submitted, we now have a full picture of how many companies used the funding and what for how many vehicles. So we can provide that data. I can say that 7 independent drivers use the funds. That accounts for about 20% of the funds that we distributed to those drivers. Yellow Cab and Transco both use the funds for repairing 21 and 22 vehicles respectively. And that's about 30%, 30 to 40% for each company.
Thank you. I want to talk about universal e-hail efforts. And I've got a handful of questions on this, so you can determine who you want to do the whole run of them, Deputy Mayor. Just to establish a baseline, can you talk about what universal e-hail is and what is currently happening?
Hey, you want to take that?
Yes, sorry, it takes me a couple of seconds to unmute myself. So universal e-hail is essentially referring to a platform where you can dispatch various calls from a centralized platform to various companies. Local taxi, as you are aware, we finalized our grant funding last year in April. We provided grant funding to Transco, that is a partner with CURB, and CURB is the universal dispatch or universal e-hail platform that currently exists in Chicago, New York, and some of the other cities. Prior to DFHB awarding the grant, passengers could only use the CURB platform to summon Transco taxis. Now, the purpose of this grant is to essentially expand the number of available taxis on the CURB platform so that when passengers summon or e-hail or summon a taxi, other companies are also available on the CURB platform. So we're planning on increasing the supply of the inventory of taxis on the CURB platform. And
did you want to add something? Sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sure you will have follow-up questions.
Your testimony today notes that the CURB app themselves have hired recruiters to bring more DC drivers into the app. Did CURB make those hires with the grant from
Yes,
DFH?
they did.
Okay, great.
And this involves recruiting drivers, meeting with drivers in person, making sure that they understand how the technology works, training them so that they understand that they know how the app works. They remember to turn on the app. They remember to turn on notifications on the app. So these are small details that are key factors in success of any e-hail program. Drivers also need to get to the habit of turning on the app, right? So we so far spent the 10% of the funding we've had for driver recruitment. And these factors that I just mentioned have taken longer than expected for us because we had to reach out to drivers, make sure they understand, train the drivers, make sure they understand how the app works, remember to turn on notifications. So this is like a one-on-one, sometimes maybe in groups, but mostly one-on-one because each driver has a certain, drivers understand directions differently. And, we had to meet with drivers one-on-one to resolve some of the issues.
Your answer to Q14 provides information on the $100,000 grant to Transco for that work. Can we get into that? No, I think we're covered there. Sorry. You did a great job answering. Okay. How many drivers are now available on CURB?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yes. How many drivers are now available on Curb?
So there are about 500 drivers available. As we mentioned in the testimony, over the past year, we were able to add 75 drivers. So with that 75 drivers, we have 500 drivers available. We are, though, working on integrating one of the other big companies into the Curb platform. So we're hoping for that number to increase once we're done with the integration. But as I mentioned, it's not as easy as flipping a switch, because we would have to train drivers. You would have to make sure that they buy into the idea of turning on an app and getting used to the habit of it and understand that they need to turn on their notifications. So, and technology integration is also a big part of it. Companies dispatch drivers differently.
I was going to ask.
So we need to make sure the technology integrates.
I was going to ask you what percentage of drivers that is, but I think we can do that math based on the other numbers you've provided in your testimony. So we'll spare you that one. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Is the goal to have 100% of taxi drivers available for the e-hailing on Curb?
So we're hoping to expand as we work with several different companies. We're hoping to resolve some of these technology integration issues to increase the number of available drivers on the app. We're hoping to have 75% of the taxis be available on the Curb platform once we're finished integration with one of the big companies that I just mentioned we're working on.
Any thoughts on making this a requirement eventually rather than just a grant or incentive?
I think this is a complicated matter. Requiring something per se doesn't mean that requiring a program or an action per se doesn't mean that the program is successful if we don't thoroughly think through some of the technology integrations and making sure that the drivers are happy and they understand how to use the app. Customer satisfaction. I think we need to reach to a point that we feel confident that we have enough customer base and drivers are trained and we have enough drivers on the app. So I think we have some time. We need to finalize what we have right now, look at the integration, look at the number of taxis that are on the app, and then determine the next steps.
So what does success for the Department for Hire's Vehicles Universal e-hail effort look like with Uber's taxi partnership program out there? Because that seems to be a hurdle with that happening while we're trying to do this.
Thank you for the question, Chair. We don't see them necessarily as competing opportunities. And so we don't think that the success of one necessarily prevents the success of the other. Uber, we partnered with them, or not necessarily partner, we've allowed them to make that opportunity available for taxi drivers. We realize that they being the taxi drivers, need as many opportunities, economic opportunities as possible. So while we're doing the work to ensure that our e-hail app is successful, these drivers can continue to take advantage of that opportunity now. In fact, the success of that app may further their usage on the Uber app rather may further the success of our e-hail app, because as Faye so eloquently stated, it's not as simple as turning on a switch or even mandating the usage. There's a psychology a part of it, there's training that's a part of it, and we have to bring the drivers on board to something that will work for them. The other risk that we have to balance is once we announce this to the taxi riding universe in the district, we have to make sure that it works, right? So we don't want to announce this, the availability of this app, and customers have bad experiences such that they never support that app once it is fully fleshed out. So I hope that answers.
It does. Okay, so we have to briefly adjourn before we move on to discussing the legislation so that the Office of Cable Television can switch things over. So we're going to stay on the same Zoom. So just feel free to turn off your camera, get up, walk around, and and I will come back to you in a minute. The time is now 12:16 p.m. and this public oversight hearing is adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll do like 10 minutes. I'll say, let's come back at 12:25. 12:25 sometime.
Sounds good. Thank you.
When everyone comes back, I will gavel in and we'll swear you again.
No problem.
And in the room, if you unmute one mic to say I do or whatever, that should be good for everybody. As long as I can see you. All right. Do it. The stream was still going, don't worry. Okay. Good afternoon. I am Ward 1 Councilmember Brianne Nadeau, Chair of the Committee on Public Works and Operations. Oh, here, tap, tap. There we go. Today is Friday, February 16th, 2024, and I'm calling to order this hybrid hearing of the committee in room 123 and on the Zoom platform. The time is 12:26 p.m. and this hearing is being live streamed at brianneknadeau.com/live, as well as on DC Channel 13 and dccouncil.gov. Okay, so we're joined by government witnesses for the Department of For-Hire Vehicles, Keith Anderson, Deputy Mayor for Operations and Infrastructure, Nikisha Sanders Small, General Counsel of the Department of For-Hire Vehicles, Faye Daskeb, Senior Policy Advisor, Department of For-Hire Vehicles, and Travis Nembard, Enforcement Program Manager, Department of For-Hire Vehicles. This is technically a new hearing following our oversight hearing this morning, so I'm going to re-administer your oath. If you could raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you are about to give to the Committee on Public Works and Operations is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I do.
I do.
Great, I got you all. Yes, you do. You do on Remix. Okay, so let's start with questions about enforcement and VIOs and get into specifics on the Traffic Enforcement Expansion Amendment Act. The Deputy Mayor's testimony mentions there was a 62% increase in notices of infractions issued by VIOs in FY23, which is impressive because I think the number of officers declined a bit due to vacancies. What drove that increase?
So I can speak to that. What drove that was essentially the increase in VIOs. So while we do, as you had noted, have some vacancies, we also did hire additional VIOs in the interim. And then also the new authority over food parcel delivery as a temporary authority is something that obviously added to the additional NOIs that were going out. So that was the big change, was probably the temporary authority.
Did that take away from other enforcement actions?
Our team does a good job of trying to walk and chew gum at the same time. So we often, there's a lot of overlap, right? So you see some companies like some rideshare, food parcel hybrids, for example. It's hard to say specifically, but I would say that for the most part, our officers have been able to stay productive in their traditional duties as well.
Testimony also says thanks to a federal grant, officers have dedicated additional hours to enforcement. What does that mean? Those funds are paying for VIO overtime?
That's correct.
What grant is it?
It's the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration grant. It's actually through DC's Highway Safety Office. And those funds are primarily for overtime, but have some limited application to some equipment to help our officers do their jobs more effectively.
Is it a multi-year grant?
No, each year we have to reapply.
The DC code says the Department of For-Hire Vehicles shall employ no fewer than 20 vehicle inspection officers. Leaving aside vacancies, how many VIO positions are budgeted for?
It's budgeted for 20.
And how many are currently filled?
16. I should note that we're currently backfilling those other 4.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So no, that's okay. What is the deployment schedule for VIOs? Are they on shifts as bars are closing during peak nightlife hours?
So we have 4 shifts currently, 2 that operate in the mornings from 6 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And then 2 that happen in the midday to evening and early morning, I should say. And those locations, given our size, are basically determined on the need on a given day. So we do traditionally we do roll call before each shift, and we determine what are the high priority areas. So, for example, we may have gotten some complaints about double parked food parcel delivery vehicles. Well, now our officers are going to deploy to the wharf or deploy to U Street or any other high density restaurant locations. Or if there's an event going on, maybe we go to the Nat Stadium, or maybe there are travelers coming in from out of the district, so we go to Union Station. So it's really a fluid process as to where we go.
How active is the morning shift?
Pretty active, but obviously not quite as active as the nightlife. Are you meaning the early morning or
Yeah.
early morning? So our night shift goes into early morning.
Oh, okay.
And it's pretty active. Our early morning, our actual full morning shift starts at 6 a.m.
Okay. So how about the full morning then? How
Yeah.
active is that? How busy is it?
So rush hour, it ebbs and flows. So rush hour is busier, and then it'll kind of wean off a little bit. Then it picks up around lunchtime, and so on.
Got it. Does the nightlife task force require overtime?
No. Okay. So let me explain this. So with regard to the actual night shift, no, that they do not require overtime. They receive obviously nighttime differential, given that they're working outside of standard hours. But we do have a special operations unit that will often incorporate officers who do not typically work the night life shift or the nighttime shift. So in those instances where they may be working those additional hours, and those are typically through the grants, we will then they will then be paid overtime.
According to the vehicle inventory report you provided, it looks like the enforcement fleet that VIOs are using isn't in great shape. Only 3 are in good or excellent condition, and 5 of them are classified as poor condition. What's the plan to modernize the VIO fleet?
Yeah, so we are actually, and thank you for that question. We are actually in the process of doing so. We are looking to begin the larger phases in the next fiscal year. We've already brought in 2 additional vehicles currently, and so we're looking to kind of build on that and hopefully have that done relatively soon.
Okay. Could you please read the agency's answer to question 62 in pre-hearing responses? I think that establishes a good start to the conversation about the enforcement bill. You still have the binder with you for this hearing?
Does the department support a permanent definition of care?
Yeah, exactly right.
Yes. What was the question?
Can you read me your answer?
The written response?
Yeah.
DFHV stance on supporting a permanent definition of carrier for hire services in DC Official Code 50, Section 50-301.03, alongside associated regulatory authority depends on multiple factors. To effectively regulate these parcel delivery services, DFHV would need real-time delivery services trip data from transportation network companies. However, and I believe that's I believe that the TNC trip data, they're referring to the food and parcel delivery companies included in that. However, even if this data were to become accessible, the substantial increase in technology costs for storing and managing millions of trip records poses a significant consideration. Managing trip data goes beyond storage. It involves converting raw data into actionable insights for the enforcement division. This process requires planning and implementing data processing pipelines, analytical tools, and reporting mechanisms to derive meaningful information for regulatory purposes. Oh, did you want me to continue? Furthermore,
This is just for the public benefit. I think it's good to have it on the record and we can launch into discussion. Thank you for
Sure.
humoring me.
Furthermore, enforcing carrier for hire services under DFHV's authority permanently would demand additional resources. This includes, but is not limited to, an increased number of vehicle inspection officers and associated costs, including enforcement vehicles, parking space, office space, uniforms, related administrative costs, and ticket adjudication costs. These multifaceted factors necessitate thorough consideration before DFHV can firmly support maintaining carrier for hire under its defined authority in the code. This complexity underscores the need for comprehensive planning and consideration before proceeding with any permanent decisions regarding the regulation of carrier for hire services under DFHV's authority.
So to be clear, carriers for hire have, of course, always been subject to MPD and DPW's enforcement of parking and moving violations. The only thing this bill changes is that VIOs would now be authorized to do so, correct?
That's correct.
I've gotten a few different answers from Department for Hire Vehicles on this question, so I'm hoping since we're talking directly with the enforcement manager, we can get this straight. Do VIOs enforce and keep taxi stands and PUDO spaces clear, or just taxi stands?
Just taxi stands. We help and assist with PUDO zones wherever possible, but we don't necessarily have the same level of authority around enforcement in the PUDO zones. But we do our best to help with traffic flow, for example, by putting on our emergency lights, that sort of thing, to keep traffic moving, to get
So kind of like, woo, woo, try to move someone on, but you can't actually write the ticket. It's sort of like an empty threat. I know it works though.
Yeah, it works.
Okay, I've seen it in action. I'm not knocking it, but I mean, why don't you have that authority?
Part of that is because DFHB doesn't typically carry parking enforcement authority. It's usually relegated to DPW. And so we do have some limited parking authority for, parking on a taxi stand, for example, that sort of thing. But primarily we tend to enforce traffic moving violations.
Okay. Don't you think it would be helpful to have in 2024 while we're the modern day?
I think that ultimately I think that theoretically, yes, that it could be helpful, but I think that working with our sister agency, DPW, and obviously, with the deputy mayor taking into account all of the moving pieces that happen within Demois, I think, whatever kind of comes out of those discussions will be, the ideal objective is to have the most efficient way of enforcement. And so to that extent, we're happy to look into that and to try and figure out ways in which we could be more effective around those sorts of scenarios.
What do you think, Deputy Mayor, from your lens up the chain there? I mean, wouldn't it be useful for VIOs to have this authority?
I think we need to have some more conversation with DPW around this. On one hand, I do think it would be, and we do support the intent of this bill. But I think more discussion needs to be happening around joint enforcement efforts and what that looks like.
Okay. The bill is introduced defines a carrier for hire as a class of transportation service by which a 26 network of private operators, couriers, or carriers provide transportation of parcels, food, or 27 beverages in the district for compensation. Is this the right definition? Oh, sorry. Was that a bad paste? All right, so ignore the numbers. The sentence will make more sense if you don't have numbers interspersed, which were actually meant to be line numbers in the bill. Okay. Just goes to show you sometimes whatever you put in front of me, I'll read. Okay, so a class of transportation service by which a network of private operators, couriers, or carriers provide transportation of parcels, food, or beverages in the district for compensation. Is that the right definition?
That's the current one. I would say for us, for DFHB, it would be helpful for us to have greater clarity and specificity around what constitutes a carrier for hire. To give you an example, the types of vehicles, we have seen an uptick in motorized scooters that have seated scooters, which have been used to deliver food and parcels. And we aren't exactly clear on where the authority ends as it relates to e-bikes, for example, or even someone walking to deliver food. So increased clarity as to the types of vehicles and modes used to deliver food and parcel, and also the aspects of whether it's a restaurant versus the delivery only, or a hybrid where it's a private for hire company, for example, as well. So there's definitely more clarity that would be helpful in our opinion.
Okay. Thank you. The council has recently passed legislation and governing food delivery in the Fair Meals Delivery Act and is taking the second vote on the restaurant revitalization bill next month that would expand that further. However, that legislation is in the code under a standalone section on third-party food delivery, nowhere near the code section on the for-hire vehicle regulation. It also includes definitions that might conflict with the carrier for hire definition in this bill. Do you think laws and regulations of this industry should be consolidated under the Department for Hire Vehicles?
So again, given the complexities of the cluster of agencies that we work with, I would defer to the deputy mayor as to whether or not that should be the case. Do you want to take that up, Deputy Mayor?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, can you repeat
Yes.
that question?
The council has recently passed legislation governing food delivery in the Fair Meals Delivery Act, and it's taking the second vote on the restaurant revitalization bill next month that would expand that further. But the legislation is in the code under a standalone section of the third-party food delivery, nowhere near the code section on for hire vehicle regulation. And it also includes definitions that might conflict with the carrier for hire definition in this bill. Do you think laws and regulations of this industry should be consolidated under the Department for Hire Vehicles?
Madam Chair, allow me the opportunity to have a deeper conversation with my team about that.
Okay. And I'm not talking about budget, staffing, resources, just like where is the right place for this to be
Where to
in the
go?
DC code? Yeah. Because, if we're changing things, we want to make sure we're orderly about it. Do you know how the number of NOIs issued per officer has changed since the temporary carrier for hire enforcement authority went into effect?
Travis or Nikisha, you?
I can take. I'll take that. So we're not. So the temporary authority, there's no way for us to know because we don't actually. You're asking regarding the number of tickets per officer, the ratio?
Yeah.
So as it relates to the tickets per officer, I would say that it hasn't changed significantly. I'll have to go back to my team to generate the specific numbers. We haven't explicitly looked at that as it relates to food and parcel delivery. I think currently, for example, for our VIOs with a TNC or rideshare, more commonly known as, it's roughly around 1 to 2,000 and change as a ratio. As for the food and parcel delivery, again, those numbers are a little bit less clear, and so we would be happy to get back to you as to the specific numbers. We'll generate a report, and we can get you an answer for that. We can at least work to do that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
How else would you propose laying out a plan of growth for the VIA program to make sure these enforcement resources keep pace with the need and demand? And what should we be looking at to get a sense of what the overall enforcement needs are?
The VIA program?
The VIO program, I'm sorry.
Okay. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. How else would you propose laying out a plan of growth for the VIO program
Okay.
to make sure those enforcement resources keep pace with the need and demand?
I think at this point we take it one step at a time. Right now, we have been able to effectively do our job. We've made major inroads and have received positive feedback from different stakeholders in the community, and so we feel pretty good about where we are at as it relates to the aspect of expansion. Again, I think that involves a larger discussion, and would be something that I'm sure we can all work to look to try to figure out in predicting out in advance. But where we currently stand, we have been pretty effective at our current levels.
Okay.
And that's absent, obviously, new authority. With new authority, that may change, obviously.
Okay. The agency notes that to effectively regulate these parcel delivery services, Department for Hire Vehicles would need real-time delivery services trip data from TNCs. What's needed from the delivery platforms?
So we would need essentially, we would need trip data. We would need from the start point to the end point. We would need assurances that the companies would be providing or verifying that individuals are who they are through the various mechanisms similar to that of what TNCs do. We do believe trade dresses would be helpful for our officers in identifying the vehicles, and if you don't mind, I would be happy to also answer any concerns as it relates to the idea of a trade dress, but that is something that we do think would be very important for our officers to be able to rely on. We have been able to make do without it right now, but it's significantly easier for us to be able to identify vehicles that have a trade dress or an identifier. We would also need additional resources around adjudication. With the increased authority, there will be increased enforcement activity, which would mean that there's going to be more adjudication, more tickets that are going to be issued. But for the most part, we would need largely information that's on par with what we do currently request from TNCs.
Are there other jurisdictions that already require this data sharing from delivery platforms?
I am not clear on that, Faye.
This is certainly something that we will take a look into in the future. We haven't explored that, but that's certainly something that we need to look at as we continue exploring what works and what not, and what are the best ways to enforce services such as food and parcel delivery.
It seems like everyone from council to residents, the industry, and drivers themselves are dissatisfied with curbside management and the availability of pickup drop-off space. This is probably a good deputy mayor question, since doing that right requires the coordination of DDOT, DPW, and Department for Hire Vehicles. What's the future of pickup drop-off? It's clear to me that the initial PUDO program has completely stalled.
Our agencies are looking at this, Madam Chair, very closely in terms of PUDO. I don't know that it's stalled, but it's something that we are very keen on, and I will be working very closely with the director of DDOT, Department for Hired Vehicles, as well as DPW on this. I heard the testimony earlier from one of the gentlemen who actually, I think, started on using bike deliveries, has moved to vehicle deliveries, and heard his concerns very clearly. So I will be having those conversations to ensure that the PUDO program, we move that forward.
Deputy Mayor, would you support increasing the percentage of deliveries done by bike and scooters to get it above that 2% that DoorDash mentioned, and using incentives?
Yes.
It's not a trick question, I promise.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Does the agency, does Department for Hire Vehicles have the data it needs to recommend new pickup drop-off spaces to DDOT?
Ray, do you have that?
Yes. Sorry, it took me a couple of seconds to unmute. As I mentioned earlier during the performance oversight hearing testimony, we do have the pickup drop-off data. The level of specificity for the data and granularity of the data is such that is 3 decimal points in the district and 2 decimal points in the suburban area. So the information we provide to the data that we get from TNCs, the data is not very granular. As a result, they know when DDOT looks at the data, for instance, they know a pickup drop-off happened at an intersection, but they can't clearly determine what corner at the intersection or what block face. So in order for DDOT to determine specific pickup drop-off locations alongside the curb, more granular data is more helpful.
Okay. Okay, so this hearing the testimony today, I'm sympathetic to the issues that an increase in ticketing might have on workers' take-home pay, even if that enforcement is needed for public safety. DMV has an existing program called Multi-Vehicle Fleet Ticket Service, and this consolidates all the vehicles in a company's fleet, like UPS or FedEx, and means the fleet is not subject to booting or towing. I know that TNCs and delivery platforms have been very clear that the vehicles used by their drivers are not their fleets, but I wonder if some consolidated program like that might be helpful both for government and the companies, and wondered if you're interested in exploring that topic.
Thank you for the question, Chair Nadeau. That is definitely something interesting that we would look into. However, I do want to raise the consideration that that distinction is not insignificant. As the driver, the DoorDash or Dasher, as they're called, shared, he's an independent worker for Dasher that works, according to DoorDash's representative, perhaps 3 hours a week. I think there's a huge hurdle for the government to climb, given the makeup of this industry. But certainly, as we look into best practices in other jurisdictions for other items, we'll look into it for this as well.
Thank you. Anything else you all want to add on this bill, the enforcement bill?
Could you repeat that question?
Anything else you want to add on this bill, the enforcement bill, before we move on?
I would like to say, as it relates to the what our officers have seen in the with the aspects of food and parcel enforcement, the largest the largest issuances have come from obstruction of traffic, as you would imagine, but there have also been instances of lacking a driver's license, for example, or a registration, vehicle registration, that sort of thing. So to that extent, there's a lot of data that we are starting to collect from the enforcement activity that we're conducting, and we're happy to work with you to that extent moving forward as it relates to the bill.
And if I may add, Chair Nadeau, with respect to that act, 2 points of consideration. The current bill allows enforcement only and does not allow the agency regulatory authority. So that is a consideration that the agency would want to be explored. that makes it difficult for future ideas in down the line if we don't have the ability to issue regulations that apply to that industry. The other point I wanted to make when you look at the increase in the tickets in that sector versus our existing sector, sometimes it's just the newness of the authority and the time for the community and other, stakeholders to become aware of, of this new authority and what they need to do to stay on the right side of NOI as it stands. And also, because it is a new authority, I don't believe our VIOs have had the opportunity to provide the driver education that they provided under our existing authority. So once this law is, if it's made permanent and this community is made more aware of what they should do and what they shouldn't do and the consequences failing to do what they're supposed to do, I think we might see a balancing of some of the enforcement and some of the safety issues that we see now.
Thank you.
That's an important point mentioned by the General Counsel, is that, which I forgot to mention, is that to her point, part of the challenges with some of the drivers is the fact that this was a new authority. Many of them did not know, but it did, as I alluded to, highlight certain instances where, for example, maybe there's a driver operating with a foreign country license and not an actual valid driver's license, or people operating on the platform that are not who is said to be operating on the platform. So it's somewhat of a complicated issue, but in many ways, as our regulatory framework becomes more standardized for those drivers, they will understand essentially the rules of the road, and that should assist with some of the concerns that were raised earlier today.
We're going to move on to the Let's Go Act. What is the agency's position on this bill?
Thank you, Councilmember Nadeau. The agency supports the intent of the bill as it aims to enhance transparency and accountability in the various transportation programs that the agency offers by requiring the agency to publish annual ridership reports and related data. We agree that a data-driven approach could lead to more efficient allocation of resources in the long term and potentially saving costs by targeting areas with the greatest needs for transportation services. So we agree with the intent of the bill. We have some concerns that we're happy to share with council as it pertains to potential privacy concerns, the nature of the programs, and in addition to concerns regarding specific data points.
Would it make sense to have this data regularly updated on the agency's data dashboard rather than prepared as an official report?
That is a really good question. We are happy to explore this option. Each option has its pros and cons. We're happy to explore what's feasible, what's easier for the public, and less resource intensive for the agency, and we're happy to share that with you.
Do you support the recommendations from Ms. Clark about looking at DACL microtransit programs as well?
That is a really good question. We internally discussed this a couple of days ago, actually. We can explore how we can partner with other agencies to identify what programs they offer and how the public can, where to essentially post this information so that the members of the public can go to one platform, one web page to see what programs are offered. I think it's a great idea that we can explore.
Her testimony also suggested that DACL programs might be duplicative of Department for Hire Vehicle programs. Do you think that's true?
That we need to take a look into and explore more. We're happy to get back to you.
She also raised a concern about outreach for these programs not reaching those who need them the most. How could that be addressed?
For the transportation programs that the agency?
Yeah, the microtransit.
Microtransit. We do a lot of outreach for the DC School Connect program. We do some outreach for the DC Neighborhood Connect program, and some of the outreach that's some of the other programs we run in coordination with the other agencies. And so that should be a conversation that we need to have with other agencies as far as outreach. But yeah, I think that's something that we can explore further.
What data in this bill do you already keep track of that could be publicized?
So we currently keep track of trip level data. So number of trips, locations, cancellations, time of the trips, total counts broken down by our programs, specifically those programs that are funded by ARPA. Those counts are in an annual performance plan.
And what data in this bill could you track but would need additional work?
So and that goes to the point about our concerns. Some of the data points may need additional follow-ups. That includes driver surveys, coordination with MPD on crash data, DUI data. Those sort of like data points require more coordination. We have some concerns regarding to the data collection as it pertains to detailed demographics, for instance, for students. And so those are something that can be done, but requires careful data management strategies. But also a section of the bill, one of the provisions in the bill discusses the requirement for publishing data on correlations between student academic performance and school attendance. And that is one of the concerns that I flagged earlier, and that that's a topic that it's a study by itself. It requires a lot of deep dive because student performance that is impacted by a variety of external factors that are outside of the scope of the program. Obviously, things like school attendance, data like school attendance is a data that we can get. We're not getting right now, but we can get in partnership with Aussie and DM.
Thank you. Referring to Q48 of the agency pre-hearing responses, it seems like most of the agency's reporting requirements are out of date or not especially useful. I'm thinking we might want to use this as an opportunity to streamline all of that reporting. The response was the cost per passenger is $13. Oops. What? No? Okay. All right. So can we work with you on streamlining that reporting?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So, there was a pretty remarkable decline in Neighborhood Connect trips in 2023 once the $3 fare was implemented, basically a 50% decline in trips from June to July, which seems to have remained stable. We're now seeing about 5,000 trips a month where we used to consistently see around 10,000. Was the 50% decline in Neighborhood Connect ridership in line with what the agency anticipated once the fare kicked in?
Yes.
Okay. And is that ridership change due to the same number of riders taking fewer rides or some users dropping out of the system entirely?
We need to look into that to identify whether super users are the users that stop taking the microtransit service because introduction of the fares. But I can tell you that we did survey a good number of individuals or passengers who stopped taking microtransit trips in July, and did take trips in April, May, June. And we found out that 75% to 80% of those individuals started taking Metro bus after we instate the fees.
Thank you. The current cost per trip on Neighborhood Connect is $34. While it's not a direct comparison, the cost per trip of Metro bus is around $10. Is that a cause for concern?
Well, not sure if it's a cause of concern. The purpose of the program was to provide transit options in areas of transportation needs, as well as ensuring that the taxi drivers also can provide other services aside from taxi service. And so that's something we can certainly look at. But we do agree that looking generally and comprehensively at how much program costs and where it offers services, and compare that to WMATA's transit system and where the gaps are, I think that's something that's helpful to look at.
Great, thank you. Okay, so if we can talk more philosophically about microtransit, a goal of mine is to make sure that our microtransit programs are not just floating out in space, but instead are thought of as part of our overall transit system. Part of the reason I wanted to include Councilmember Henderson's bill in today's hearing is because I think it helps open up this conversation. And I think it's good that you're here as the deputy mayor, Mr. Anderson, because this is more of an agency cluster level conversation. I've expressed a concern that Department for Hire Vehicles doesn't have the information or analysis to know whether a program like Neighborhood Connect is taking trips away from people who would otherwise drive or is actually cannibalizing public transit. How do you think we can use these various microtransit programs to move towards the district's goal of reducing single occupancy vehicle use?
Councilman, I agree with your point on microtransit. And I think we're going to continue to work with our sister agencies, continue to look at the data that we have. I do know that I cannot remember the number, but the overwhelming majority of district residents live within a quarter mile, which is the acceptable distance to a bus stop or metro. But we need to continue to look at those who do not. And we'll continue to look at the data, work with our sister agencies to include metro, and ensuring that microtransit is not something that's just in the stratosphere, but a coordinated effort.
I wonder if the Department for Hire Vehicles might be able to help with WMATA's future by replacing the cost of running slow and circuitous coverage bus routes. Even with the added $3 fare, Neighborhood Connect ridership is high east of the river, which has the most challenging terrain for bus quality. Do you think the Department for Hire Vehicles or even the DEMWA has the ability to analyze whether some of DFHV's program offerings could suitably replace some local bus service?
I think that's a conversation we can certainly have. I don't want to, give the impression that it could replace any of WMATA's service, but it's definitely something we can look at as we look at our transportation system as a whole.
Have you spoken with WMATA at all about how the district might step in on some services they're currently providing?
Not specifically on that. I have had several conversations with WMATA, but not on that.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on to the final bill today, the trade dress. What is the point of trade dress laws?
Thank you for the question. The point of trade dress laws are multi-factored. For one, there's a huge safety issue. I know you've seen recently where rideshare passengers have gotten into the wrong vehicle. As long as a trade dress is placed in the correct place that's visible, then that should avoid those instances from happening. Additionally, along the same course of safety, in our area, that allows our VIOs to determine when someone is properly acting as a for-hire vehicle. They're able to identify them, and they know in terms of our authority, that's a vehicle that they can enforce for safety and traffic violations.
Thank you. And what are our current trade dress requirements? Are they in line with other cities?
Sorry, it took me a couple of seconds again. That is certainly something that we absolutely have to look at whenever we develop new policies. That is the first thing we look at. We look at peer cities and we do a market research. So that's something that we'll definitely be looking into in the next couple of months.
Do you think the bill's requirement would be an improvement?
So I would say that it would be an improvement to the extent that we may have a trade dress on both sides of the vehicle. I do think we've made a point to note that the rare sticker or trade dress may be onerous to the drivers. Our officers, one of the more common violations that our officers run into are people not having a trade dress when they should. Adding an additional window may just merely aggravate the situation. But we do agree that the rare driver side and passenger side windows, those adjacent windows, make a lot of sense from an operational standpoint as it relates to not only our officers being able to identify from across the street or on the same side of the road, but for consumers being able to see as well whether or not they're operating as a TNC, for example.
Would it make sense to require TNCs like Uber and Lyft to issue standard trade dress materials? Right now it varies a lot because drivers can choose what to display, like with LED lights that aren't acquired from the company themselves.
So we're happy to work with your team to come up with standardized approaches that make sense. One thing that we do note is that it is important that the trade dress is able to be identified as belonging to the particular company that's operating. So to the extent that we can standardize it, but at the same time keep with the spirit of being able to easily and readily identify which company is operating or which operator is operating for which company, that's the balance that we're trying to essentially keep. But we're happy to work with you to figure that out.
Thank you. We had some written testimony express concern that adding trade dress requirements would negatively impact driver safety by making them a target. I guess we had that live too. I'm not sure that I'm convinced by that argument, considering we already have taxi cabs that are very clearly taxis. There should be better ways of ensuring driver safety, certainly. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yes. So we currently have our taxi cabs, as you alluded to, that make it clear that they are operating as taxis. We have the TNCs that are making it clear that they're operating as rideshare. And limos, for example, that essentially often indicate that they're operating as a private vehicle for hire or a sedan class vehicle, I should say. So for ultimately, when it comes down to the trade dress aspect, a few things. Number one, we currently have one company. We have a company that's operating as a TNC and simultaneously as a food parcel delivery, and their drivers, to our understanding, operate with the trade dress, even though that trade dress requirement may not be required for food parcel, but because of the fact that they often have that overlap, all of the drivers tend to utilize it. There has not been any signs of activity that would suggest that TNC is being negatively impacted in that way. Moreover, our team has worked with the mayor's multi-agency public safety task force to do things like educating drivers about best practices to avoid becoming targets. One of the common incidences that we do see as to why those food and parcel delivery drivers are often targeted is they leave the car running and run out quickly to go deliver the food. We often try to inform the drivers about best practices like turning off the car and locking your vehicle as well at a bare minimum, so that there's no risk of entry, and working to try to, like I said, increase information and education around best practices for staying safe. And then I would say, lastly, there's a public safety element. It would be operationally very difficult for our officers in the long term to rely on just simply inferences. It has been effective at this point, But as traffic and activity continues to ramp up in the industry grows, it's likely an industry standard that would be expected to be able to have some form of way of identifying drivers so that our officers are not constantly put in a position of having to determine whether someone's getting out to pick up their own food or someone is operating as a food and parcel operator.
Thank you very much. Should we also have a trade dress requirement for carriers for hire? And if so, how might that apply to people delivering on mopeds or bicycles?
Okay. So for the carriers for hire, yes. The carriers for hire should have a trade dress requirement similar to that of TNCs. Again, it allows us to be able to more readily identify those vehicles. We are happy to work with you guys as it relates to determining what makes the most sense as it relates to the mopeds or the electric scooters. Our team has not yet settled on a position as to what is the best means of identifying those vehicles, but we are in the process of working through and trying to think of ways that make the most sense, that are not as onerous on the operator, but also effective at helping to identify those operators that are behaving as food and parcel delivery services.
Thank you. Should a driver have to display all companies they work for at all times, or only what they're currently working?
So we haven't given that, we haven't, again, this is part of it's part of the deliberative process that we're right now undertaking as to what makes the most sense. And so that would be definitely a factor we would have to consider when weighing out recommendations to your team as it relates to what's the best practice. At the moment, we do not have a position on that.
Thank you. Any other comments on the legislation?
Nope, not for me.
Okay. I had one more question that I forgot to ask earlier, related to a current event. So we learned when an individual was assaulted in a Lyft last month, and we contacted the office, that the only way for the Department for Hire Vehicles to initiate an investigation is after a complaint is filed. So even though the victim had, was going through police report with MPD and doing all of that, and I think Department for Hire Vehicles and Lyft worked really quickly to get that driver removed from the platform. The victim would have had to file a complaint, I believe, in order for an investigation to occur. Do I have that right? And if so, would it be beneficial for Department for Hire Vehicles to be able to initiate investigations when they feel it is warranted?
So from a logistical standpoint, it's generally encouraged that an individual files a complaint. It is not necessarily a requirement that our office takes action if they're aware of some kind of wrongdoing. Those can be issued out in different ways through our complaints division. But as it relates to the ability for our agency to operate in that incident or just generally the sphere, we are limited in what information we are privy to. We don't have the same level of data and information that we would for a taxi cab, for example. So we're reliant on the cooperation of the TNCs when providing information. Again, there's no legal requirements as to certain data that we would typically have for a taxi cab. And so given that it's not a requirement, that process is slightly different because it's not mandated.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for that. That's all I have for today. So I want to thank you all Deputy Mayor, thank you for your flexibility.
My pleasure.
This concludes today's public hearing. If you plan on submitting written testimony for the record, please do so by going to the Council Hearing Management System at lims.dccouncil.gov/hearings. The record will close on Thursday, February 29th at 5:30 p.m. The Committee on Public Works will be holding one more performance oversight hearing on February 21st on the Office of Human Rights, as well as our joint hearing with T&E on the Deputy Mayor for Operations and Infrastructure next Thursday afternoon. You can visit the Council Hearing Management System for more information. The time is 1:21 p.m. and this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.